Hello, everybody. This is the Sherborn Advisory Committee meeting of February 7th, 2024. I'm Dan Sickle, chair of the committee. We will proceed by reading the agenda and checking to see if there are any changes to the agenda. We'll do well, let me pop the agenda up. Hang on a second. Let me do it. Let me do this the right way. We'll get the agenda up, get it shared so everybody can see it. All right, and give me just 1 second to do a little quick rearranging. All right, so I'll read the agenda in a minute. We'll take care of that and then get to our main business for tonight. So as I said, we'll start with just getting the agenda approved. We'll do liaison reports and any announcements or other kind of quick things like that. We will go back and look at minutes from the January 31st meeting and see if those can be approved. And then our plan for tonight in terms of budget review is to start with Jeremy Marcette, Town Administrator, who will do an overview of the capital budget since advisory has not yet very much focused on capital budget. We'll be looking at things that have made their way through the capital budget committee. We'll then pick up capital items from DPW. And then for police and fire, in turn, we'll do both operating budgets and then capital requests. So just so we get a chance to hear about all of those. And we'll end with debt service. So that being said, anyone on advisory with any changes, alterations to the agenda? Paul, go ahead.
Hi, Dan. One thing I'd like to suggest is perhaps at the end of the budget review items, I'd like to bring up the reserve fund again, if we could.
Thanks. I think we're going to want to add that on to another meeting, given that I'm not sure that we're going to have everybody here. And I think we probably don't want to get into that without kind of previewing that we're going to do that. But it's a great suggestion to touch base on that.
Understood. Thank you, Dan.
And let me circle, Paul, let me circle back to that after we get the agenda approved, but let's plan on adding that to an agenda at a subsequent meeting. And let's circle back in a second. Nora.
Yes, can you mute everybody, except for you, of course, there's somebody that hasn't.
Yeah, give me a second.
He can do that now.
Somebody is
raise from the rear on.
It looks like it's Frank and Beth Jenkins, so I think that's lighting up.
Let's see, hold on here.
What about us? Going down the driveway.
Frank, could you mute? Thank you. Okay. All right. Nora, sounds okay from where you are now?
Perfect, thank you.
Great, okay. Okay. Any other agenda changes? Then I would welcome a motion to approve the agenda as read.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right, quick roll call. Paul.
Aye.
Shelley.
Aye.
Natalie.
Aye.
Ken.
Aye.
Mike W.
Aye.
Mike F.
Aye.
Nora.
Aye.
And I am aye as well. So agenda approved 8-0. Okay, so coming to liaison reports, I think Deb Seafring just got on. So I think Paul, I think you missed this a minute ago, Deb, but Paul had asked about getting a chance to talk about reserve fund amounts. And that put in mind the idea that something that would, I think, just be some interesting numbers is a little bit of history on the, and this is not for tonight, this will be for a later meeting, but a little bit of history on the reserve fund and of the portion in the reserve fund, essentially how much got used each year.
Okay, I don't.
It's not for tonight, and you missed
Okay.
the conversation, but I think we'll add that to the agenda to subsequent meetings. I think there's some interest in just people kind of understanding a little more about how that works.
All right.
And what the numbers have looked like, say, for the last 10 years or something.
All right, sounds good.
Perfect.
Deb.
Thanks, Deb. Okay, Paul, does that take care of that?
It does. Thank you,
Great.
Dan. Thank you,
Okay.
Deb.
Great. Ken, go ahead.
On the topic of not for tonight, but I sort of still remained uncertain and troubled and perplexed by the sort of sustainability package. And I'd love it if it'd be possible for us to go back to that at another meeting when the relevant people are here and it can be put on the agenda properly.
Okay, yeah, as you suggested in your comment, since it isn't on the agenda for tonight, not something we'd want to dig into tonight.
Right.
I'd be happy to add that, some further discussion about that to a future meeting. I am guessing that would be February 28th, because February 14th, next week, we're meeting with school committees. Following week, we typically don't meet because it's school vacation week and people tend to have other things going. So that would put us out to probably February 28th as a time perhaps to do that. But we'll see what else is on the agenda and how that goes. But happy to come back to that if there's interest in that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
The other thing I know about, let's see, on liaison reports. Paul, Mike, and I went to the school committee meetings last night, both the Sherborn School Committee meeting and the Regional School Committee meeting, where they presented version 2.0 of their budgets. Paul, Mike, would either of you like to say just briefly, we're going to hear all about it next week, but just really briefly what the version 2.0 budgets look like?
I'd be happy to start.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul.
Right. So some happy news from the school committee, right? The version 2.0 of their budget, which they presented last night, for the Sherborn Public Schools, there's a reduction of $328,000 from version 1.0, and it represents a 3.99 increase over fiscal year 24. The version 1 was 8.1% increase. So, and when they present, they can summarize some of the reasons for that, if you will. And they're still looking at a few other items as well there as well. That was for the Sherborn schools. The DS regional schools also, kind of as is historically the case, their version 2.0 budget is a lower one, right? So their proposed increase is now 3.61% over fiscal year 24. It's hard a little bit to sort of split out. Like overall, they presented the overall budget, but then the net assessment for Sherborn would be a 3.61% increase over 24, which is less than version 1.0. And they plan on having a version 3.0 ready for the open meeting on March 5th. That's the overall summary. I don't know if you want to add more, Mike or Dan.
No, I don't. I think we don't have to get into any additional details necessarily before next week. And I was just going to throw out there that that's a combined reduction of just over $600,000.
Yeah.
The combined is what? I couldn't hear you.
$607,000.
Is the amount that version 2.0 came down relative to version 1.0 across both Pine Hill and the region? Yeah. So yeah, moving in a better direction. So next week, we and Dover Warrant will meet with school committees. So we're going to start at 6:30. It's at the middle school, and I think we're going to start with the Sherborn meeting. I think the Sherborn meeting will be in it's not in the library, but in a close by conference room. Expect that will go for 45 minutes or less, and then at 7:15 we'll start the meeting with the regional school committee, which will then have Dover Warrant involved as well, and that'll be in the library and should be starting at 7:15. I think we'll get an overview of budget from Dawn Fattore, from the business manager of the schools, and that's really our opportunity to ask questions, dig in, make sure that they have been as careful as they can be about budget dollars in the schools, while doing everything they can to ensure that they're providing top quality education in both Pine Hill and in the middle school and high school. Let's see, one other liaison piece, a loose end to just circle back on. This is really kind of joint from Penn and me. I think Penn had mentioned before that he had talked to folks from the Historical Commission about the cost of the historic marker signs that are going up. After a bunch of conversations and emails, I think they went back to their vendor and price came down by $700. And so the commission's budget is going to be $700 less than what we than what we were looking at when we talked about it back earlier in January. So credit to Penn for kind of pursuing that and seeing a place where with just a little bit of additional effort, not a huge amount of money, but hey, $700 is $700. With you know, a bit of extra care, numbers could get pulled in a little bit. Anybody else with any other liaison items to talk about? Any other reports to bring to the committee? Okay, well, let me stop sharing the agenda and let me pop minutes up. So we've often done this where I've scrolled through. I was going to suggest, since I'm guessing people took a glance at these ahead of time, I was just going to ask for any changes. I'm happy to scroll through if anybody would like me to, but I was just going to ask for any changes, suggestions, edits, and take those on board. And if there aren't any, then just proceed to hopefully to a vote to approve. Anybody with either any edits, suggestions, changes, corrections, typos, or anybody who wants to scroll through and see the whole thing on screen? So then I welcome a motion to approve the minutes as flashed on the screen and as distributed earlier.
So moved.
Thanks, Natalie. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so roll call on minutes. Penn,
Aye.
Nora,
Aye.
Mike F,
Aye.
Mike W,
Aye.
Natalie,
Aye.
Shelley,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
and I'm I as well. So we're 8-0 on approving minutes. Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody. Let me get that off the screen. So then we should just get started with budget reviews. Jeremy, do you set to do a bit of an overview of capital budget? If there's any document you'd like me to share, I'm happy to do that. You can share whatever works best for you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Yeah, let me, I'll share the screen here and just go through a summary of the
Perfect.
capital plan. Great. So in the lead up to your discussions on capital, Dan asked that I give an overview of the capital improvement plan that was put together. So the few slides and some information that was distributed to you all before the meeting, but I just wanted to go through and hit some of the high points just to give you sort of some of the background of the overall capital plan. And of course, you'll be talking in detail about each of the capital requests and can ask questions and get more detail from each of the project champions in that process. But the draft capital improvement plan, as you recall, last town meeting actually updated the bylaw relating to the capital plan and moved the date earlier in the year so that the capital plan was due to be published at the beginning of December. So trying to spread out the operating and capital budget processes so that there was time to focus on each in their time. So the draft capital plan was put together through the month of October and November. The Capital Budget Committee, which is named in the town's bylaws as the committee that considers all matters related to capital improvements and makes a recommendation to town meeting. They annually consider those requests and are asked to have a 6-year look ahead. That's about all in the town's bylaw that talks about capital. There's not much else as far as ownership of the capital plan, other than in the bylaws, it talks about the town administrator being responsible for the maintenance and repair of town buildings, facilities, and properties. Necessarily, that is capital related. But unlike some other communities, Sherborn does not have a clear ownership of a capital plan or budget for that matter in its charter. Some communities have it clear that, X body or X position prepares and submits a budget by a certain date and it must contain X, Y, and Z. Sherborn's bylaws are not as specific as that. But with the need to have a plan put together, we started it in October, working in the capital budget committee. They put forward their recommendations and guidance. Town administration took that and added to it, created a capital request form, and requested all the capital requests come through the town administrator and finance director so that we could help vet them and compile them together for the capital budget committee. So that was a step that we sort of added this year to help compile the plan. And we really impressed on the requesters to look at the full 6 years of the plan. So not only what they would look to request this spring at town meeting, but what they anticipate in the next 6 years. So we could do a nice update of the full plan of the full 6 years. And we asked to have all the requesters follow the town financial guidance policies. Those are all published on the town's website. Those policies, which were adopted by the select board and advisory several years ago, do touch a bit on the need for capital planning. And so we met with all the requesters in November and compiled all that information into a capital plan, which was published December 3rd. There was a cover memo that we put together describing the plan, what is a capital improvement plan, the process involved with updating the plan, the goals of the CIP plan, referencing some of the goals and how you put together a capital plan by the Division of Local Services has a guide that helps form capital plans. And so that was certainly a reference for us as we put this together. We asked and helped prioritize projects, and that's indicated in the plan as well. You know, urgent, legally required, must do projects, level 1, should do or maintain service level 2, enhancement could do level 3. Outlined some assumptions that went into development of the capital plan. And then there was an overview in text format here, which since December 3rd has been updated. So we did update the background detail of this memo and have provided it to you. And I'll show you that in a little bit. In this memo, also, we talked about funding the capital improvement plan. Just like an operating budget, there's two sides. You have an expense, you need to pay for it somehow. In general, larger projects in Sherborn traditionally have been funded via tax levy, tax exempt borrowing. So there was been a ballot vote in town meeting approval, ballot vote, and there's the debt service on those capital projects is exempt from the Prop 2.5. So it's not what they would say, the debt service is not carried within the levy, they'd call that. It's capital projects generally have been carried outside of the levy through exemption. Other sources of funding could be grants, state earmarks, ARPA funds we do have and need to use in a certain amount of time. The ARPA funds were from the outcome of COVID and helping recover from that. The federal government provided Sherborn about $1.3 million in coronavirus local aid that has been allocated by the select board for various capital projects. And this Thursday, actually, the select board will be looking at the ARPA spending and looking at projects that have been committed and some of the uncommitted funds in the ARPA funds and maybe looking to reallocate their use. But as of now, the capital improvement plan as developed does not include any use of ARPA funds to fund it. And also free cash has been a funding source, certainly for smaller items that don't require borrowing. And the rest of that, I will summarize. So the 6-year plan includes about a little over 55 projects in detail in the spreadsheets that are attached to the CIP. Projects, vehicles, equipment purchases, studies, roadway improvements, all of those sorts of things would be included in the capital plan. There are 55 separate lines of those projects. Some of those projects are multi-year long, so the roadway improvement project is counted as one project, even though that's annually funded. I didn't count each 6 years. It was just a one in the 55 project tally. But the sum of all of those projects, the capital improvement plan is currently a $15.7 million program over the course of 6 years. Preliminarily, the plan identifies about $11.7 million of that would be funded through tax exempt borrowing. I'm sorry, there's a typo there. It's not a tax levy, that's tax exempt. And 1.5 million would be free cash. And then our Chapter 90 or state roadway funding that we get each year over the course of the 6 years is about 2.5 million. So that all sums up to the funding that would be shown to pay for the improvements included in the CIP. Here's a breakdown of the capital requests by department. At the dollar amounts per department on the left, and then on the right, the capital request dollar amounts by category of the 6-year plan. And you can see a good chunk goes into facilities repair and replacement. Infrastructure certainly would be like roads, sidewalks and the like. Vehicles and equipment's a large one, and then parks and open space by category. This also includes grant funding that we've been awarded, that state aid prior, not only Chapter 90, but it also includes the $850,000 that we've received towards the Washington Maple Street intersection. So known grant funding sources were included in the capital improvement plan, in particular in the recent years. So as far as the impact of this proposed plan on the town's debt service, Pam has nicely done several iterations at this point of what the debt service impact would be for the CIP plan if all of the projects in the 6-year plan were conducted at the price that were estimated, and the ones that were anticipated to be borrowed. This would be the impact on the debt service. And the way you read this, on the chart, the gray is existing long-term debt service. So that's actual, we have bonds out there that are, multi-years in length, 10 to 30 years in length. And that we pay a principal and interest on those. That's in gray on this chart. And we're sitting here in 2024. The teal color, the greenish blue, is what's in a short-term borrowing or bond anticipation note. So that's not long-term borrowing, that's short-term. And we do that to provide cash flow to do the project. But since the project's not completed yet, we're not comfortable borrowing long-term because we may not need to borrow it all. So there is an interest cost for that. For bands, generally, we're not paying down the principal, but there is an interest cost that's associated with that. And that's shown in the teal. And then the impact on debt service for the capital plan projects is in the dark blue. And the numbers above the dark blue show the increase in debt service per year as a result of the capital plan. So for instance, in 2025, if all of those projects were approved for 2025, the debt service would increase by $300,000. I mentioned free cash is another source of funding for capital projects.
Jeremy, can I just ask you a question about that? If you could just slip back.
Sure.
So on the teal region, the ban. So currently, a ban in place on which the town is paying, as you said, just interest. That ban presumably disappears this summer when that gets rolled over into long-term debt. So this summer, some chunk of the teal turns into gray, but the teal bar continues. That's because the expectation is in future years will be similarly situated and they'll be banned for the short-term stuff before things get converted into long-term bond.
I believe that's correct, Dan. Yeah. So it's, there's some assumptions built into this model, and that is
course.
one. That in any given year, there would be some level of short-term borrowing required to fund the program.
Yeah,
And that may be less. The cost of long-term debt is certainly cheaper than the short-term band borrowing. So it's not just a matter of turning the teal to gray. The when you convert to long-term debt, the cost is less. So that's good. So I guess it's conservatively estimating that we'd carry this a similar amount of short-term debt over the years.
yeah. And as you said, it looks like from reading the graph as if maybe it comes down some this year, but in general, the expectation is there'll still be, 130,000, 40,000, whatever, of band interest to be paid every year, even if it comes down a little bit from the 165 that, is or whatever the current number is. The expectation is it would come down a little bit from that, a little bit.
Yeah.
It's what it looks like is built in. Okay. Thanks. That's super helpful. Thank you. Sorry to pull you down that rabbit hole, but
No, no worries. Yeah, ask questions anytime through this. I'm happy to answer it after as well. But just a few more slides here, just some background information to go. So free cash is another source of funding that the town has used for capital projects. And this is a graph of the historical certified free cash. That's what we know we have after the fiscal year closes, how much free cash we have to be able to use towards other things outside of the operating budget. That's the history of what was been certified in free cash is in teal. And what the town has actually used its free cash to spend on capital is shown in the dark blue. On average, the town has used about $300,000 per year to fund capital. So that was a good data point as far as what seems to be around what seems to be a good number to be used for funding capital via free cash. You can see there were a couple years in 2020 and 2021 that no free cash was used. I think that was to help with the town's finances and just be conservative going through the beginning of COVID. Provided this to give you a summary of the ARPA funds that I mentioned earlier and what's been committed and spent. Well, actually, this is what's shown as what has been committed by the select board to be used. Overall, we received $1.3 million. The projects on the top here show that we've allocated about $1 million worth of that towards projects. Not all of that has been spent yet. It does need to be utilized by a certain date per the federal government. We have to have all of our funds committed to a project by the end of this calendar year. And then I believe by the calendar year after that, we have to have it actually spent. So the clock's ticking, and if we don't use it, we lose it. So we are, again, the select board is revisiting or reviewing the status of all the projects that currently have funding coming from ARPA, the status of them, what might be available for reallocation. And also, I should note that there is, $240,000 that hasn't yet to be allocated. That's not committed to any particular projects specifically by vote. Some of that has been, quote, earmarked for a couple projects, but hasn't had a vote of the select board committing them to such. And then on the bottom here, not ARPA, but earmarks, other state grants or earmarks that we've received funding various projects, just showing that we do take advantage of other sources of funds. We like to spend other folks' money instead of our own when we can. And the last slide here is, this is a slide of the current status of the capital request for fiscal year 25. So here's the projects that are currently on the table that are being requested to be funded. And a number of these have been vetted and discussed at the capital budget committee. Only a small handful have not yet received the full vetting. And I will say, I guess, the top project here, the 400,000 for the Pine Hill school cooling. That was an estimate at the time that is seeming maybe a little bit less in the final analysis. But these are all, some of these projects are proposed to be debt funded, some are proposed to be used free cash to fund them. But overall, they sum to 2.6 million for all of those projects. And then here's a breakdown of capital requests by department for FY25, and here's the actual summary of again, that's a typo. This is tax exempt borrowing and free cash funded projects. The data behind the actual data, like the full detail of the capital improvement plan, are the tables that we sent around. And I know it's very hard to read here, but I just wanted to point you to them. You can look at these at your leisure, but in general, it includes the project, the department that's requesting their project name, the category that it might fall into, the nature of the request when provided, the tier or priority of the project, the funding source anticipated, the total project cost for the 6 years within the CIP term, and then the capital cost per year, per fiscal year in the CIP term. And then, so it includes all police, fire, schools, public works. We put out a broad net to try to capture as much as we could to make sure that this was as comprehensive as it could be. The select board tried to impress on all folks that they didn't want any surprises of project coming out of nowhere. They'd like to have everything identified on the 6-year plan. Emergencies do happen, but for planned expenses, they really want to have them identified in the 6-year plan and not appear magically from one year to the next. But there's IT projects that might be sponsored by the select board under their authority and purview, projects the recreation committee, and then let's see over here, it just sums up all of the costs by year and by funding source. And then is a similar table of the detail for what's being requested in fiscal year 25 with some more detail than that table I just provided. So that's what I have for you, Dan, as far as an overview of the capital plan.
That is great. Thank you, Jeremy. That's really a nice kind of starting point. So as I mentioned at the outset, our plan for tonight is not to talk about all of that, but to focus in on capital requests from DPW. And then as we hear about operating budgets from police and fire, the chiefs will also talk about their capital requests. And the remainder of the capital requests we will get to later. Partly that's because in some cases, Capital Budget Committee hasn't finished with some of those, and it would be preferable for advisory to get to these after Capital Budget Committee has gotten to them. So unless anybody has any questions for Jeremy, looks like not, then Sean, the floor is yours if you want to walk us through DPW capital requests.
Good evening. I'll take the floor, but can someone else share? Dan, can you share the requests by order that you want to talk about them maybe?
I can. Give me just a second. Getting to the right place in the document. Okay, so I've got these in the document that Jeremy shared earlier. And let me share that, and then Sean, just tell me how as you want me to move through these, how you'd like me to go. Is that showing up all right?
Yeah, I'm trying to expand it. So this is for the truck, the snow fighter. This was already presented to capital budget and they voted to support it. We have 5 large trucks. They happen to all be internationals at the moment that we run as the large snow fighters. Those are the big trucks with the sanders built into them that you see mostly doing the main roads. They usually team up with either another DPW truck or a contractor during the snowstorms. We were replacing one a year right before I started, 15, 16, and 17, and then I stopped. There was at that vintage truck, there was a lot of issues because of the new diesel exhaust filters and everything else. And then, so there's 2 remaining trucks that were not replaced that, because of their age, they actually existed well before we built the new building. So they suffered from a lot of rot because the previous building, the facility on Butler Street, did not have a wash bay. So during the winter, it was very difficult to be washing the chemicals off. They also used to spray calcium chloride along with the salt, which is 7 times more corrosive for the truck frames than just straight salt, if you can imagine that. So the time and winters have taken their toll on the 2 remaining older trucks. They're both over 20 years old now. So we're looking to replace one this town meeting, which will not most likely even show up for next winter. So both of those trucks, we got to limp through the next 2 years with, well, the remainder of this year and almost definitely next winter. We're moving away from international. We've had a lot of issues with the internationals and a fair amount of issues with the service coming from international. So we've chosen to go with a better supplier, both because of the chassis and because of the dealer network that we're able to use for the service. The next page, I don't know if you have it attached to this. The next page is the specs for anyone that likes to look at specs of large trucks. Most of that looks like options, but it's really not options. These, you can see at the top, it references the Greater Boston Police Council, MAPC. That's a set of bid specs that went out. We often reference this as in layman's terms, the state bid list. There's different groups that put out truck specs, equipment specs. Greater Boston Police Council is one of them. So these aren't really just arbitrary numbers. There's a massive database of option codes for the equipment. That's what's referenced in the item number. So those are the same prices for those line items or options that anyone would be paying that's part of this group. So that's how the truck is built. It'll have a stainless steel body, which is how we've built the last 3 to ensure that the body lasts as long as the actual chassis of the truck. We're going to go back to putting tanks on them so that they can spray liquid along with the salt application. And we expect this truck to hopefully last as long as the ones we're replacing.
So on the list of items, is the way to think of this is that, so should I think of this as like a fairly standard configuration and they just break out all the pieces? Or is this like a standard configuration plus some things that would make, that you thought would make sense for the town to add on?
So, it's just, nothing's really standard, but it's basically the standard configuration that matches how we had built a couple of the trucks previously, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
Both the brand of the dump body / sander, the type of plow that's on it. The first line item, the Western Star, that's the chassis versus we were buying the International. Most of the other things look like options, but they're not. 20,000 pound front axle, 30,000 pound rear axle. That's just how that's how the chassis is going to be built. So there's not too many that are really options. I mean, there's a seat in there. Obviously, the chassis is going to come with a seat. So some of them are it's specialized, but it's the entire truck is specialized. It has a belly scraper. All of our trucks, if they have a rear sander, we put belly scrapers under them, which nobody really notices, but that's a snowplow blade that's under the truck that works great in addition to or in replacing the plow that's on the front. So it's not really worth anyone's time to really look through those specs, because it's not like you could say, well, why don't you just not put the mirrors on? Well, I'm not gonna, I can't. That's just how that's how they derive at the price.
Okay, so it's I guess a way of putting it is these trucks are sufficiently custom that you basically have to specify how you want it built.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. It's not like going to the this is going to sound really naive, but it's not like going to the auto dealer where there are 3 trim lines and you pick which trim line you want.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. All right, so let's pick up any questions that people might have for you on this one. Paul, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. So I just had a question on the total. Look like the total on the spreadsheet on the spec sheet is lower than the capital ask 334K versus 400K. I wonder if you could describe the discrepancy there.
Correct. Well, we need to make sure we cover in case there's a year-end, a model year increase from the factory. So again, remember I submitted this in November. We're rolling into February. We need to make sure those prices hold through July. So we may be able to tweak that price before town meeting. But again, this is the difficulty with coming up with a price in 2023 that I need to have in the summer of 2024.
And that potential price increase isn't knowable from the vendor? That's not knowable?
Well, it's a contract. In November, it's a contract that may or may not expire before 2023, before 2024 in the summer.
I see.
It'll be knowable before town meeting, but I haven't modified that number yet. We might be able to pull it down.
Okay, thanks, Sean. That answers my question. Thanks.
So it sounds like,
Again-
Sean, possibly at town meeting, the number could be refined if there's new info.
Yeah, I doubt I'd do it at town meeting. I'd probably do it before the hearing so that
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, that would be
it's
much cleaner.
correct.
Yeah, that would be much cleaner. Yeah, okay. Other questions for Sean?
I have a question, Sean. You mentioned that there's two vehicles left that need to be updated. What's your plan for the other vehicle? Are you going to be able to push that out if we go forward with this one? Or is there a plan on that one yet? Or are we just kind of tackling one at a time?
Yeah, it's in the plan for a year later.
For next year, okay. So we should
Yeah,
plan, the cost would be comparable to the cost of this vehicle, right?
Did you hear me?
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I said correct. Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
okay.
okay.
So we're
Gotcha.
looking at this cost and then in a year, it would be an additional for the other vehicle. Okay, thank you.
What else for Sean on this one? All right, want to keep going? Oh, Penn, I think. Penn, did you have a comment or question?
I did, and just that, as you know, Dan, I had some questions about this, and actually, I'm not a liaison, I did get it. Sean showed me the trucks in question, and we touched briefly on this, and it's not an exaggeration to say the trucks you want to replace are in tough shape, at least I'm a car guy, so my semi-knowledgeable eyes are like, yeah, these puppies are pretty whopped. So.
Okay, thanks, Penn. All right, Sean, on to the next one.
So roadway management is a kind of our annual ask for funding. In the ask, we don't define exactly what projects usually are gonna come up. Remember last year, we were kind of gearing up for the roundabout, thinking we were gonna do it this past summer. Now, we are going to do it next summer. But we have numerous roads we're gonna have to address, before they get much worse. Anyone that drives down Forest Street realizes it's peeling open like a zipper. Snow Street, it has some major stormwater damage, and the storms this year have really identified a handful of areas that we have no choice but to address, either for massive erosion on the edges of the road or the constant icing that we're seeing due to the heavy amount of rainfall we're getting, and then you know, that causing icing for days, if not weeks. That would be Farm Road, Whitney Street, Lake Street. So those are the type of things we identify usually in the spring as what we're gonna hit. This will be combined, as everyone will recall, with either you know, there's a previous article that has money in it, and of course we get an annual batch of money for our Chapter 90. So they pretty much all combine to make a project or multiple projects.
Okay, thanks. Questions for Sean on? Do you want to say anything about guardrails and stuff? Anything to talk about on that?
Yeah, that fit in with the same thing. Guardrails, asphalt, drainage repairs all fit under the roadway management. And it's no secret, if you live in Sherborn and drive down a road, you've seen that a lot of our guardrails, albeit we intended for them to be rusty, are beyond rusty, and they're actually many of them are just basically falling off the posts. That's obviously due to the winter treatment and age and weathering. So there's a lot of money, and we're making a pretty significant dent now, and some that are causing risk in a couple areas, but there's much more to do.
Questions for Sean on this one? This is pretty standard article. Okay. Do you want to talk about Western Avenue?
Sure. This article is asking for specific money that will basically accomplish what the town's been trying to accomplish for quite a while through several different committees over the years, with Western Ave in particular. There was a couple different committees that were created as part of, or in addition to, traffic safety. One was Western Ave Intersection Committee, and another one was an ad hoc Western Ave committee. They were developed originally to address the increase in traffic from Odessa, from the auctions, and in the past couple of years, especially my experience when we were working on Western Ave, not just Odessa traffic, but there's a lot of truck traffic. There's a fair amount of accidents on that road that don't really have anything to do with traffic, but certainly have to do with both speed and people not paying attention. It's a long, relatively straight road with some curves that seem to inevitably sneak up on people, and they just drive straight off the road and either hit telephone poles or stone walls or other cars. So in the engineering, a couple things were identified in the past that were turned down both by the committee or by my predecessor, and they're generally referred to as splitter islands. And anyone that lives out there remembers during COVID, we tested that with the black and white planters, and we tested some of those in conjunction with crosswalks and some crosswalk lights. So we've identified several areas where we feel that those will work really well to both slow the traffic down and keep people's eyes on the road. Similar to, there's numerous towns around us. Wellesley, Needham have quite a few. And we think they're gonna work well. They're also gonna help slow the traffic down at the Maple Western Whitney intersection. So the purpose of the money would be for design, which will basically be a survey and an engineer just laying out, making sure that the islands fit. And they're put in the right place so that trucks can enter and exit the roadway. And we can accommodate putting a crosswalk back at Fessenden and stagger the islands around it so that it's much safer to cross, because there's a fair amount of people that use that crosswalk to get to and from Fessenden from Pleasant Street. So that should help. We're confident we have enough money in here to build a few of them and use our existing roadway management contract with Lynch and some money towards engineering for it.
Sean, a question popped up to me in the chat on this about how are you thinking about the priority of this project?
I don't understand the question.
Oh, so in the material that Jeremy prepared, there's a column for priority tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 with, that essential, absolutely positively have to do for health and safety reasons. Really, I think tier 2, very desirable. Tier 3, good to do, but could wait. And I think one of the folks living on Western Avenue just sent a private message to me in the chat wondering, where this fit in that along that dimension.
Well, I think it is a public safety thing. And I think we've waited quite a long time to work on it. So I think if you lived on Western Ave, you drive that roadway, you'd say it's certainly a safety issue and should be addressed. It's worth noting that the town has collected permit fees for several decades from Odessa. We've spent some of that. There's been former town meeting votes to spend some of that on engineering. But the vast majority of it has just gone towards the general fund because that's the mechanism that the permit referenced, but the money hasn't come out. So you could loosely tie this to using some of that money. It's not a direct correlation because that's not part of this article. But we've certainly netted from Odessa significantly more money than this over the past couple of years, and this would certainly go towards showing that we're utilizing that money for what we said we were going to use it for.
Yeah, I think the sheet says tier 1, so it'd be urgent. The sheet that you're showing.
I was just gonna add, whatever the judgment is about where it lands between tier 1 and tier 2, that just as a matter of process, if this item goes forward and is approved by town meeting, it'll happen. So it's not a matter of that after town meeting, there'll be some assessment of what are the priorities and where does this project land. If it's approved by town meeting, it'll happen. The ranking of tiers, I think, is really designed to help capital budget committee and advisory, understand, the degree of urgency of different projects.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dan. It's certainly not what I use to prioritize.
Right.
Once something's approved. In fact, this project the only timing I'm going to consider is how to time it to not conflict with the roundabout, just because we're going to be rerouting traffic in town.
Right.
So we may try to get it ahead, but I doubt that would happen. So it would trail behind the roundabout.
Okay, good. Natalie, question, comment?
Well, yeah, my question was what Sean was talking about, the earmark money that comes from Odessa, and it has been for years. Somebody that wasn't allowed to be spent just in the general fund, so it exists somewhere. I was wondering if Jeremy, or I don't know who's responsible for where that is and moving it to something like this, that maybe Sean can reduce his ask by the amount of money that they've already collected for traffic calming on Western.
Well, it's in the general fund. So essentially, if you want to do that, just use free cash and pull it back out of the general fund. It's not, that money was not put in a separate account. So
But they know what it is, and it was earmarked for use only for Western Avenue, I believe. So
Let me
if
help.
they spent it by accident, right? Is that correct, or am I understanding it wrong?
I think there's some semantics as far as the funds. So the funds have come in because of a special permit that the planning board granted to Odessa. And it was part of that, those fees come in annually. Unfortunately, state accounting law does not allow us to, or did not allow the town to put those funds into a separate account. So all those funds over the years have gone into the general fund as miscellaneous receipts and have been used to offset the operating budget every year. So, and that's per the agreement with, in the special permit, that's okay, because in theory, the funds that have come in have helped offset the police department budget the police have done traffic, enforcement and so forth on Western Ave. So there's no issue with the use of funds. But what this capital request is intended to do, it'll be funded by free cash, which is from the general fund. This is intended to sort of move forward with some of the commitments for that agreement and to the residents of Western Ave and the need of the roadway to
So all
increase
that
safety.
money that they collected for traffic calming has been spent, just in the general budget, right?
In the general budget, yep.
Okay. But going forward, are you going to use that money for these kind of a project, or is it all just gonna get thrown in, continue to be thrown in? At
Well,
first, it was earmarked and used for traffic calming, like the first couple of years. And then somebody quit doing it.
I can't speak to years ago, but until recently, just in the last 2 months, there's a new act of the legislature that was part of the budget reconciliation, I think, for FY 23. They increased the flexibility of where funds like this can go. So now, just as of the last a month or two, when the state legislature approved this general law, now the select board can create a separate accounting for these funds. So we intend to do that in advance for these funds, and we intend to do that in advance of the next rounds of fund. We generally get these funds in June of every year. So we would intend on utilizing that new law for the select board to help segregate these funds going forward. We just can't, going backwards, it was all part of the general fund, but going forward for the funds we may receive in June, we would intend to have a separate accounting.
I guess, thanks, Jeremy. I guess I'd add for my part, given that, as Jeremy just said, those funds just kind of landed in the general fund and got spent on other stuff. That to me suggests that the 75,000 being asked for from this is, a fraction of what all of that would have been. And so to me, that just makes it easier to get to yes on this one. Given that, if those funds had been segregated into a separate account, it might have been, feel easier financing it because it's just coming from that account rather than from free cash or the operating budget. But it makes it a lot easier for me to just get to yes on this because, it seems like something that would have been done if those funds had been segregated. So strikes me as a fine thing to take care of those problems, an important thing to take care of those problems on Western Avenue.
That's a very, very similar response that the capital budget committee made to that as well.
Anybody else on this one?
Yes, can you hear me, Chairman?
Is this Eugene?
Hi. I'm on
Hey,
the
go
Western
ahead.
Avenue. Yes, I'm on the Western Avenue Residents Committee. Just wanted to give you, Sean and the group, a little bit of feedback from our meeting last week from Lee Chertavian, our chairman, and Diane Polizzi at 210 Western, which is right next to President Field. Couple things. First of all, the experiment last year, Sean, was much appreciated, but our feeling was that without a widening of the streets, it actually possibly presents a danger to put some of the median strips near Fessenden. Diane mentioned that she walks her dog there on Pleasant. And, it's very dangerous. It wasn't really safe to do that with those median strips. For example, bicyclists, they don't have enough space because of the median strips. So our thought was, and last week we discussed that a lot of the danger occurs on Western and Route 16, particularly trucks illegally turning Odessa trucks left from Holliston. And our hope is that, for example, maybe we could put an experiment with a median strip there on Washington Street, just as we do at 27, rather than just repeating what we did on Western. And then, of course, maybe cutting some trees very fastidiously on the corner and there's intersections of Western and Washington, as well as Brook Street and Maple and so on and so forth, for visibility purposes. Because school buses, as you know, are very much turning on Western onto Washington and so on. And so this is just a little bit of our feedback for you, Sean, and the committee.
So thanks, Eugene. Sean, I'll give you a brief comment if you want to reply to that, but that sounds mostly like a conversation that should be happening offline relative to this meeting.
Yeah, it's really
Thank
not
you.
for this. This stands the way it is. That's what I brought. There's lots of other work we can look at. And I would say the test was a test. The reason for having an engineer to look at it and a surveyor lay it out is to ensure that we have the proper road width and can accommodate that. But we're going to own the conversation here. We're not going to try to re-engineer what I'm proposing to the advisory committee here. They can bring those comments to the public safety committee.
Thanks, Sean. Sarah, did you want to get in with a comment?
Yes, hi, I did. I'm at 255 Western Avenue, and I also am on that committee, the neighborhood group. And I just want to say that, we also discussed that we wanted to fully support Sean's proposal here. And that as many of us as we're trying to get as many people as possible to attend town meeting to support it. I'm sure that like Sean said, the engineers will determine that, these islands will be put in places where the road is wide enough. So I feel confident that that will be done, but I think this will be much appreciated by our team, along with our other main focus, of course, is to keep the Odessa permit and its restrictions in place, but that we have another year on that. So thank you, Sean, and thank you to the committee.
Thanks, Sarah. Anybody else comment, question about this for Sean, or general comments for the committee? Okay, good. All right. Thanks, everybody. That was good. Okay, so Sean, let's moving on. Stormwater permit.
Oh, everyone should recognize this. We're going into yet another year of increasing compliance that we have to do for our MS4 stormwater permit. Each year we have a higher level of effort we have to make for our phosphorus reduction, which Jeremy and myself could go on for hours discussing and talking about. But the essence is we are required to start designing some stormwater basins to help mitigate the phosphorus load to the Charles River, which most of our town is in the Charles River watershed. So that's mandated. We still have money left from this year, but the effort is increasing through the rest of this fiscal year and into next year. For the permit years don't actually line up with the fiscal years. Well, they do, with the engineering and the costs don't. So next year we'll have a significant increase in the amount of actual engineering work. Most of the work up till now has been consulting just with developing the plan and the concepts. The next year or so, we'll be engineering, we'll be surveying a couple of areas on town properties to actually start some construction, which we may have to do within the next year, year and a half, calendar year, year and a half. So this will cover both the annual report effort, stormwater testing and design.
What's the status of money from last year? How much has been spent? How much do you think will be spent of the 250 from last year?
I don't have it in front of me. There's probably invoices coming in right now because we just did some meetings and some consulting work. It won't be all spent during this fiscal, I don't think. Right now, I think it's about half spent. So I would estimate that 3/4 of it'll be spent before July. Some of it got delayed. So, each year we have to do wet weather inspections of stormwater, dry weather inspections. Well, dry weather requires dry weather. So there was none of that going on this year. So there's a little bit of a lag sometimes with the consultants coming out and doing that because it's weather permitting. And most of it, you're not climbing into outfalls and streams in the middle of winter either.
And your judgment is that 250 is still the right number to kind of cover what we need to be doing. I understand this is rough, but as best one can.
It is. I'd rather it be 25,000, but it is. And again, we're not borrowing the money till we're spending it, so to speak, on the out years. There's a lot of things up in the air with the EPA and DEP. In the state of Mass, we're regulated by the EPA. That's who administers the permit. There's some things in play that they might be able to scale back or recalculate based on a lot of effort from local communities pushing back on the phosphorus reduction. So, the best I can say is I hope 250 is too much. But I can't confidently say we're gonna meet the requirements of the permit with less than that at the moment.
And as you said, it's as it's being spent, it's basically more or less rolling into the bond anticipation note, presumably. It's being, as you said, it's being borrowed as it's spent.
Correct. But yeah, we should be timing that out. There's no way this 250 would get rolled into a ban in midsummer when we're still working off the other one. It should be just considered an approval for future spending.
So who else with questions on this one for Sean? And again, of course, we're not voting on anything tonight, but I'll get our chance to vote on these things at the public hearing in whatever 5 weeks or something. Anybody else with anything more on this one?
So Sean, just out of curiosity, when we route the phosphorus away from the Charles River, where does it go?
Several of the stormwater basins will have treatment built into them. There's a couple different ways to do it. One is like a vegetated wetland. You basically take a basin like you see at the end of the most recent one we built was the one at the end of Pine Hill, out on Elliott Street. Picture something similar to that, but planted with wetland plants. So in layman terms, a mechanical guy like me will say, well, the phosphorus gets eaten by the plants. And it does get absorbed, much like many of the other nutrients like nitrogen. And then it just doesn't get released to the body of water. And phosphorus and nitrogen are both terrible for, aquatic. And that's why we're required. Now, some would say, and I say strongly, that the high percentage of wetlands and forest in Sherborn should give us credit. That's what we've been pushing back or trying to get our consultants to push back on EPA. Sherborn is very different than a Wellesley, a Brookline, a Newton, with massive, vast expanses of pavement that's creating this phosphorus and sending it almost unabated to the Charles River and other water bodies. So that's our effort, is to try to show that our wetlands are helping to treat that.
Yeah, no, thank you for the explanation. I was just exactly, I think you answered the question behind my question, which is, are we doing this because of this Charles River Basin and essentially benefiting others and then actually dumping all the phosphorus in our town, right? Anyway, okay, understood. Thank you.
We're not dumping it in our town, but it is to benefit others. So it's about as clear as the Charles River.
Yes.
Exactly what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. Who else with questions, comments? Okay. PFAs, public water supply treatment.
So for those that don't know, this is an emerging chemical that the EPA, DEP has mandated we start tracking. And in some instances, when you hit a certain level, right now, the level is 20 parts per trillion. If you consistently trigger that limit, we're mandated to start acting on a short and long-term action plan. The on-campus well, which feeds town hall, the library, the police station, the community center, has triggered that, and we've had to develop that. What that means right now, short term, everyone should be drinking bottled water. We shouldn't be drinking the water that's coming out of the well. Long term, it means we need to start working on how to mitigate that, how to treat that water and get it below a level right now that is 20 parts per trillion. Some think that the EPA is probably going to adjust that even downward from there. So it's not a simple call the consultant, grab a filter, slap it in. There's quite a bit of consulting that goes into what it's going to take. Each chemistry of each well is different. So that there's pilot studies that have to be done. They have to take samples of the water. They have to test them, test the raw water, test which filter media works best, and then design a system, and then design how it's going to fit in your facility, because there's limited space in any of the facilities. So this is kind of seed money to get consultants going. That'll be the number one priority. The fire station, although it's not a public water supply, has a high level of PFAS, which anyone can use their imagination to imagine where that might have come from. We're not sure, but we need to start looking at it. And Woodhaven and Leland also have some. They haven't triggered that limit. And you'll remember we're actually a different article. We're still working on that combined system. But the previous article and the work there to combine those is not addressing the PFAS, so that'll come later. It's a separate issue with the permit and with DEP. So this just starts it. By no means does this money do anything in construction wise. We don't expect that. It'll probably be significantly more money to start addressing the actual issue.
Questions for Sean on this? Natalie, go ahead.
Sean, as far as putting more money into the water systems around the town center, is the water commission still talking and thinking about doing something as town water? You and I have been on meetings together about that. And we keep paying for this, it seems to me, we keep paying for water problems piecemeal over and over and over and over again. And we never really get an encompassing solution to move forward with. Has that all been beat to death? Or are we just going to keep throwing money piecemeal at this?
The single most irresponsible thing we could do in town is to continue to throw money at it piecemeal.
Okay.
The library should have proven that, because that cost hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million extra on the library, because we don't have public water supply and fire supply.
So is there time to reinvigorate the town? I mean, does this have such a time schedule that going back and doing something reasonable is just too late?
No, I don't. It's never too late. Every building in downtown has the same issue. We own some of them. We don't own some of them. The churches, the town campus, all the buildings downtown are taxed by either PFAS, other chemicals, the road salt, the fact that the wells are too close to the road.
Yeah.
They're all grandfathered public water supplies that, yeah, the town should have a long-term plan, rather than just throwing money at individual wells. The DPW's well is obviously taxed from sitting next to the salt shed after decades of throwing salt on the ground.
So somebody's got to have somebody has to have the will and the to push some kind of a downtown water district through the town, because this is costing more than if we had actually done that, or going to cost more at the end. Yeah. Okay.
It could triple the town if we continue to do what we're doing, if we don't come up with a solution.
Yeah, I just, second the sentiments that Sean just expressed. And also, just for fun, mention that I have a copy of, I believe it's a 1917 annual report from the town of Sherborn. And at town meeting that year, they considered whether to put in a public water supply. And it was going to cost $45,000. And that was too much. And they said, nope, not going to do it. So here we are all this time later. Okay, other questions for Sean on this? Wasim, go ahead.
Thank you. So just following up on Natalie's question, it was in the town, and forgive my language capabilities that are limited, but what was the master plan? That's what it was, right? So part of the master plan was to create the recommendation was to create a water district in the center of town, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Now, if some of us are like Natalie, advocates of actually moving forward with that, what does that mean for this article? Should we, what happens if we say no to this article because we're in favor of actually moving forward with the recommendation of the master plan? The folks in the center of town now are just using bottled water, I suppose, but I guess, help me understand what happens if we vote no on this, again, with the desire to support a water district in the center of town?
Politically, I don't know how that works. Yeah, if you said, Sean, stop working on this, I think we should work on an entire single water system. I'd say that's great. But that's millions of dollars of infrastructure, millions. It's probably more than $1 million worth of engineering, studying, and permitting to create a well. I think the town should be heading that way. But that's huge. And politically, it's hard to imagine that the majority of town would say, do that. Hurry up and do that. And then, because there's anti-development reasons that it's never happened. there's commercial reasons it's never happened. There's a lot of questions to answer, and I'm all for it. I mean, I live near downtown. My well's just as taxed as anyone else's. It's only a couple 100 feet from the highway department well.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, kind of to reiterate what Sean said. I mean, it sounds like it'd be interesting to know what others' thoughts are, but, I think I would cast my lot with, very much with what Sean just said about the benefits of tackling that problem. My sense, is that that's a long-term process. It's not something that's gonna happen in a year. It's not something that's gonna happen in 2 or 3 years. It's a long-term process, and the ultimate decision, is going to lie with the select board and with town meeting. So my sense on this article is, well, I think I would, share the view that getting that process, moving that process along, providing support for that, just doesn't obviate the need for doing this, because there's an immediate problem now, and any plans for town water and sewer, even I think in the best case scenario, are years off. And this is a problem now with drinking water for for people in town buildings. Jeremy, did you want to get in on this?
Yeah, just a quick comment, just to let folks know that we are currently out of compliance with the water permit for that public water supply that serves the town campus. We have what's called a formal notice of non-compliance from Mass DEP that requires us to prepare a plan, put a plan in that how we will become compliant within a short period of time. So within a year, 2 years, how we plan to become compliant with the regulations. So unfortunately, that notice of non-compliance gives us a very short timeline for us to address this. And I fully agree that the town should investigate a water system in the town center, but we just don't have the time to carry on with that sort of study, given the notice of non-compliance from Mass DEP and that requirement for meeting compliance within a short term.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Others who wanted to comment on this? All right. So then moving on.
There we
Sean,
are.
here's the next one. You are a
So-
popular guy tonight.
Well, this plays into what we were just talking about. Woodhaven, Leland, for those that don't know, don't remember, those two developments are on two completely different water supply, public water supplies right now. Which is really weird because they're on the same piece of property owned by the town, and the well actually to Leland is behind Woodhaven. So it was weird that DEP even allowed it to be set up that way. But what happened is we found it best that it's going to be best to combine them, because both public water supplies, both water treatment, need to address what's called the copper lead rule, where the water is basically leaching copper and lead from the water supply piping. So you need to do corrosion inhibitors. You need to treat the water. One treatment system makes more sense than creating two and managing both of them at the two sites that are next door. So that was several years ago. We came to town meeting, and then since then we went further into the design, further into the permitting with DEP. We actually basically rescinded the money that town meeting appropriated, because we got an earmark and used ARPA funding to dedicate to this project. Fast forward to today, we now have a better idea of exactly how the treatment's going to be built out and the real costs. So of the money that we have, we're estimating we need another $75,000 to finish the project out. again, the money that was approved several years ago at town meeting was rescinded. We haven't spent that. So, okay, thanks. There's our estimate based on what the engineers have. And again, originally we had a preliminary design, but it had to go through review from DEP. It's not exactly cut and dry up front, exactly how you're going to treat any given well. You have to go through and sometimes do studies, and that's what they did. And the chemistry was a little bit odd in the combination of the wells up there. So they kind of they went one direction, then a different direction, and then we think we found the best way to do it. Probably the least expensive up front, but definitely the least expensive to operate, which is a huge concern. Because adding chemicals becomes very expensive because you have to manage it. Sometimes you have to monitor it every day, which we don't do. We would have to pay somebody to do.
And the other piece of the accounting here, Sean, is that the prior funding from the earmark and ARPA funds was 198. So it's total cost of 270, something like that was the total cost here. That's where the 75 is coming from, the difference between this and the 198 of prior funding.
Correct. And we don't need to roll all the way back, but I think Jeremy was showing that in one of his slides. You'll remember he had capital funds, and then he had state earmark funds, and he had ARPA funds. So that's where those
That's where the 198 came from.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And that's where it sits.
Yeah. Okay. Natalie, go ahead.
Yeah, what is our liability to Leland Farms and their water problems? Is the town on the hook for that? I thought that we weren't supposed to have to really pay for that. You know, back when they wrote their charter. Does anybody know this? No. Okay. Sean, you know what I'm talking about, but you might not have the. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways to look at that, Natalie. I would say, one, we built it. And I'll remind you, the first thing I said is that well is sitting on our property. The town of Sherborn owns that well. So
we charge them for the water?
Well, no, currently they're operating it on their own. But currently they're also running at a massive deficit. They're basically borrowing money to survive. What will happen once the system is built, at what's still a very low cost to the town of Sherborn because we got funding for it. Once the system is built, the operation will be split between Woodhaven and Leland. You know, the operating costs, the carrying costs.
Yeah.
And then, so, you know, the cost borne by Leland will be paid by Leland, that portion. And Woodhaven obviously is funded right out of the general fund of the town.
But Leland isn't paying any of this. But
What,
once
excuse
it's
me?
built, then they're going to pay something?
Not to the capital.
Okay.
Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, they're going forward for the operation of this combined system. Yeah, there would be an assessment charge to Leland Farms to offset the cost to provide water to them. The capital cost, the current capital cost, there hadn't been any consideration currently anyway to have some of that shared with Leland Farms. But as mentioned, the bulk of the funding has come from state grants and ARPA funding. And there is a benefit to Woodhaven to combine the system because of the way the water chemistry works. So just from a engineering perspective, there's a benefit for the Woodhaven folks for this to be combined.
I can add, and this predates Jeremy's coming to town, that when this first came up, whatever, 2.5 years ago, there was discussion on, Natalie, exactly this point. An advisory that I recall and at the select board, and the select board in then designating ARPA funds came to a judgment that along the lines, for the reasons that Sean was saying, that, well, the town should do this. You know, we could go back to whether that was the right call or not, but that was the call the select board made, back 2.5 years ago. And then very fortunately, a state earmark came to backfill. And so those ARPA funds that had been allocated to this could be redirected to some other project. What else? All right. Sean, I think that gets you to the end. Anybody
That's
else? Anybody, unless you have something else that I'm missing here.
No, I do not.
So any other questions for Sean? Big picture questions about his program? Again, we aren't going to vote on this till the public hearing, but this is a great opportunity to make sure questions get answered. All right, well, Sean, thank you. Thanks for
having me.
all of this. And we will then, I'll jump back to the beginning here. And if everybody's good with Sean, let's go to Chief Galvin. If you want to, Tom, your call. Would you prefer to do operating budget first or capital items first?
I mean, you have capital up, so we can start with that.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, and I just want to apologize. My connectivity's been bad, so I have 2 devices going trying to do this, and I'm going to keep my camera off. I think it'll help me get through this. So
okay,
we'll see what happens.
All right.
But on the capital, it is for the replacement of one of our police cruisers. So we would be replacing a 2017 Police Interceptor sedan. Initially, we had wanted to replace this vehicle last year, but because of some serious problems with some of the other vehicles, we had to pivot a little bit. And as part of our 2 vehicles that we just replaced, we kept this one. It was cheaper to maintain than some of the other costs on one of the other vehicles. So what our option is, and Sean spoke to this briefly earlier about the Greater Boston Police Council and the Municipal Area Planning Committee. So our quote comes through them, and it is for Ford Interceptor SUV hybrid, and the document shows the complete outfit. It's very similar to what Sean has. It's off of the state contract pricing, and you'll see that the actual estimate is a few $100s higher than what I requested. There are a couple of things I could change if this is the direction that we continue to go. One thing, I attended a meeting a few months ago with the Greater Boston Police Council, and representatives from the contracts group from MAPC were there. And with these vehicles, I don't know how it stands with the larger trucks, they are no longer guaranteeing the vehicle pricing beyond 6 months. Because of what we saw with the automotive market last year. They were losing money on the vehicles that they were selling us, and they've adjusted their pricing quite a bit, which is why you see such a drastic increase for one vehicle for this year. But what I have been doing, and I spoke about this with advisory in my initial presentation, is been looking for an alternative. Is what I had hoped was, and I think we've pretty much secured it. If we want to pivot and move, is to go to a all gasoline, not a hybrid, Dodge Charger. And Dodge actually has discontinued police vehicles. This year is the last year of the Dodge Charger, and I was able, not through any of our traditional means here in the Commonwealth, but I was actually able to search out a police vehicle dealer and upfitter in the state of Indiana. And they actually have vehicles on the lot. They would, based on conversations I've had early this week, be able to hold one for us until after town meeting. And if we were to go in that direction, we would be able to take that and reduce that $74,000 price tag by about $20,000. Probably a little more, maybe $22,000 on the car. I think when we look at total cost of ownership over the 5 years and fuel prices, we would probably be saving $12,000 to $15,000 long term. But again, we're a green community, there has been a push, and you know, it was initially when I've presented to you was to start to move towards alternative fuels. We did that the last couple of years, or last year, especially with a hybrid pickup truck and the all electric Mach-E. You know, I think that the trade-off of going to an all gas in terms of the applicability for the police department, there's no loss for us. It actually may be a benefit. None of the manufacturers are producing sedans anymore other than the Mach-E, which really is not 100% ready for patrol use yet. So we get a lot of benefit with traffic enforcement and other things that we do out of sedan. So moving to that Dodge Charger would be something that would be would work for us and would work for the long run with a cost savings for the town. So
Thanks, Tom. Well, I mean, what has your experience been with hybrids or electrics in police service relative to gasoline vehicles? I know in times past, I think many people were very keen on either hybrid or electric, and I think you heard lots of comments encouraging you to move in that direction. I wonder what's your experience been since you've started doing that?
yeah, I mean, I did that in my last department. When I left, the entire fleet was almost hybrid. It worked for us fine. There were no issues with it. What really came this year is a combination. It was the drastic increases in pricing, and the fact that they're not guaranteeing that pricing, and the inability to secure a sedan, that I began to look for an alternative. I think there's that cost benefit that we have to look at, and I was kind of interested in what the committee's input would be and their thoughts on hybrid versus gas in this situation, because there is a significant cost savings.
Right. What about the experience with all electric vehicles? Are there departments that have pivoted to that and had success or had challenges?
So it's been challenges. One thing is, we're, in particular, I drive the Mach-E on a regular basis, is that we're seeing is the cold weather effect on the battery life. It would be difficult for us to go all electric now. Chevrolet is entering the market next year with an all electric Chevy Blazer. That could be an option for the future, but we actually looked into that and the potential for that. But the base price, even for a municipal purchase, just for the vehicle, was $65,000. So then, with the upfit on top of that, we'd be pushing that price range closer to $85,000. So there's a higher cost initially for the electrics, and as the options continue with range and those type of things, it's going to be a better option to look towards. It would be very difficult to move towards that now. What we see overall regionally and even nationally is where all electric vehicles are being used. They're being used in administrative capacities and in specialties. A lot of them, what I've noticed with our neighbors, are going to their school resource officers, so that they're not out in patrol. As much as I think we'd like to see them in patrol, we've seen some of the limitations that it's not quite ready for that yet.
Okay, thanks. All right, I'm guessing there are folks on advisory with thoughts on this. Wasim, go ahead.
Tom, I thought that when you're idling a lot, which is what you do, I thought that the advantage of hybrid would be significantly, in terms of lifetime ownership, would be significantly better. But you're saying that with a Dodge Charger, the cost of the car is lower, obviously, but also over the years, the differential in gas is not going to cover the purchase of a hybrid.
Right. So yeah, like when you're looking at that $20,000 savings, we would probably save, maybe $10,000 in the fuel costs over that 5-year period that we kind of use these as a useful life. We're not seeing it was nice. Ford used to have a great calculator on their website to try and get some good estimates on that. But that's kind of what we're seeing across the board. It's not a huge savings. There are a couple of departments in the Midwest that had gone to all Teslas. And they were seeing in the all electric about a $6,000 per year fuel savings per vehicle. But less than the hybrid. Because the hybrid capacity is the battery capacity is limited. It's not they're not plug-in hybrids. I think we could get better with a plug-in hybrid. Those aren't available yet. It's all just the traditional hybrid technology.
I see. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, thank you. So for whatever it's worth, I am a fan of sedans just because there's absolutely the gasoline, you're burning fossil fuel, which is problematic, but then there's also SUVs just consume more metal, more everything, right? More road damage. So the side effects of, SUVs is a lot bigger when it comes to environmental impact than we usually think. It's not just the gasoline. So for whatever it's worth. And the other question I have for you is Cybertruck. Can you use that? That's
We'll see.
Thanks, Wasim. Penn, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So I am a car guy. So I sort of just as a matter of course read a fair amount about what's going on in the automotive world. And I would say I would absolutely support the move to a charger over either a hybrid or an pure EV. I think that for Sherborn in particular, but also for emergency vehicles, now that a fair number of them are out in the market, EVs are proving to be less reliable. Hybrids are less reliable still. I've talked with the mechanic. He said the parts shortages continue for EVs and hybrids that have abated for gas vehicles, gas and diesels. The other thing is hybrids and EVs are typically much more expensive, or can be much more expensive to repair in an accident. They're packed with electronics. Electronics don't like to be smacked around. So what could be a minor dent in a gas or diesel vehicle, I was reading this in the Wall Street Journal, a minor dent to a Rivian pickup truck was about a $25,000 fix, whereas it would have been, $1,500 of body work in a conventional vehicle. So I think that we would be spending more money up front with some savings over the course of it, but the potential for getting a less reliable vehicle that would be harder to fix, and possibly more expensive to fix if something went wrong. The other thing is I'm not just a car guy, I'm a driving guy, and one of the things I want to point out why I actually also an additional objection to EV and hybrid emergency vehicles is they weigh, sort of to your point, Wasim, plus they weigh significantly more than their gas or diesel counterparts. And the heavier a vehicle is, the worse things are if there's an accident or a crash or a collision with it. And I think it's kind of, if you think about the roads in Sherborn in particular, the idea of it's bad enough to think of a 6,000 pound vehicle flying through town. If you think of an 8,000 pound vehicle flying through town, you're just sort of magnifying the potential. If something goes wrong, if there's a crash, it's just going to be a bigger crash. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Penn. Paul, go ahead.
But I was just going to say, Tom, I really liked your assessment of and answering the questions. It almost seemed as if you were kind of convincing me that going down the Dodge Charger path might be better, right? Because of reliability, maybe EV technology perhaps isn't ready yet. So I just wonder whether you might want to just reconsider whether you want to bring to town meeting the other option. It seems like to me, even being a green community, it seems like we're going to get to green someday, but maybe there's a good case to be made, listening to your arguments, that maybe it's just not ready yet. So I'm not sure I'm in a position to take a stand one way or another, but it almost seemed to me like you were talking yourself into perhaps we're going down a different option. So I would say that if you want to reflect on that, especially given your experience with hybrid and so on, it might be a good call for you to make. And I would support, delaying going to green if that's something that you're comfortable with.
But thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Paul. Who else? What else? Others?
I'd like just to say something, Chief Galvin. Would you be able to just take this opportunity to expand on the grants that you've received?
Yeah, I was going to actually do that a little bit when I started with the budget,
Oh,
but I
okay.
can dive into that now if you want, or if it's any of other vehicle questions.
Tom,
or-
if it's okay with you, Nora and Tom, why don't we
Yep.
hold off on that till we get to the budget?
Absolutely, thank you.
And
I
let's
just,
just give everybody a chance to get in on this issue if they wish.
I'm all set then, thank you.
We'll get to that, Nora. It's a great point and question. Anybody else with thoughts on that?
I just had a question. How many vehicles are in the current fleet?
So we have 9. That number was actually reduced from 11 3 years ago.
Okay. And this may be a dumb question, but is there any value to the police cruiser when it's going off, like when you're taking it out of, like, is there a trade-in value for that? Or is that just basically it's
No,
junk?
so we have a surplus equipment account. So
Okay.
our vehicles are auctioned at the end, and the
Okay.
funds go into that, and we use that funds to offset other projects.
Okay. 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 And the life expectancy, I guess, of a vehicle in the fleet, that's the other question. I was just kind of wondering, because this is a 2017, which is, I think, the vehicle year of my car. So I'm sure this car gets a lot more, although I drive a lot, but is
Yeah.
it pretty typical to need to kind of turn them over?
Yeah, we look at the turnover pretty much as 5 years, especially now that
Yeah.
a few years ago that the town reduced the size of the fleet. That 5-year number is pretty good. You'll see some of our neighboring communities that have a larger fleet and utilize cars in different departments that we don't do. That they'll do shorter frontline times for their police vehicles and then turn them to other town departments. But that 5-year number has really worked kind of for an agency our size, with my experience.
Okay, and I greatly appreciate that you anticipated the question that probably somebody would have asked about, what is the comparison, which is in all gas vehicles. I appreciate that you did the legwork on that before you presented the hybrid option. I mean, it occurs to me that, like, if I were to buy a new car of my car now, the gas mileage is 1.5 times what I get on my car that's from 2017. So even if we're not going green, at least, in the fact that the vehicles are having to turn over with frequency, we are taking advantage of, like, improvements in gas mileage.
Absolutely, especially when you look at police vehicles. When even just 4 or 5 years ago, we were purchasing vehicles with large V8 engines,
Yep.
and now everything is a V6 and smaller. And there's been a lot of changes. You're right.
Thank you so much.
Just to follow on Shelley's point, Tom, you mentioned sort of 5-year typical lifespan for patrol vehicles. Is that similar? You sort of said this, but I just wanted to make sure I got it. Similar to what other towns are doing for patrol vehicles, and understanding that, other
Yeah, I
towns.
mean,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. So what we see is roughly for us with a vehicle, being assigned to 2 or 3 officers, putting about 20,000 miles on it per year. And so in that 5 years, it gets about 100,000 miles. If it were just 100,000 miles of wear and tear, that would be fine. Unfortunately, the idle time, and that's where really we run into our concerns, is the idle time of a vehicle with 100,000 miles for police use has about the equivalent of 300,000 miles on the engine. So that's where it's kind of more that 100,000 mile mark that I look at, and that generally falls in that 5-year period.
Okay. Anybody? Wasim, did you have a question?
No, Tom, just addressed exactly the point I was going to try to make, which is that, yes, even though this is a 2017 car and it's probably 100,000 miles, but the wear and tear is significantly more than a typical 2017 car.
Yeah. I guess, Tom, Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just gonna say, I echoes Paul's comments, would support the Dodge Charger. 10, 20 grand is real money. And as we're scrutinizing other people's budgets, I think it's smart in this environment to go that route.
So I think hearing all that, what I'll do is over the next few days and week or so, I'll finalize the upfit costs for that vehicle. And Dan, I'll get that information off to you.
Great, that'd be great. And I think where I am on this is, I'm all in favor of the town being as green as it can be for all the obvious reasons. But Tom, it sounds like your experiences in the vehicle space, and Penn, you kind of said the same thing, in the vehicle space for police service vehicle, patrol vehicle, the technology just isn't quite there yet. Might be in a few years, but it just isn't quite yet.
Especially with the all electric. I mean, we can manage with the hybrid. I mean, I'm not going to talk negatively about the hybrid, but there is a significant real financial cost to it.
Okay. All right. Anybody else on this? All right, Tom, that'd be great. If you want to spin those numbers and send them around, that would be excellent.
Excellent. I will do that.
Okay. All right. So if we're good here, pivot to operating.
Sorry, may I just ask one last question? I saw in the itemization something like, I don't know, 4,000, to fit the car with like a prisoner thing, or there was a tow. Like, is that needed on every car in the fleet, or are there? I guess my one question is, are there opportunities? And I'm sorry to dig in, like here, I know these are kind of some of the sub numbers, and I appreciate you looking at everything there. But yeah.
Yeah, we don't have them in every car right now. So the car that this would be replacing has it, but that's a discussion that we'll continue to have, and we can look into cutting some things like that, and some of the things making them smaller, and especially as we transition to if we transition to the Dodge, some of the costs are less because it's a smaller vehicle.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Wasim. All right, so let's go to operating budget.
Excellent. So,
and would you like me to share the document?
Yeah, if you could, that would be great.
Sure. Give me just 1 second.
Yep, I'll just kind of lead in. I feel very fortunate with my operating budget this year. As Nora started to mention, we were very lucky with grants. About a year ago, one of my sergeants, Kelly Exohopoulos, came to me and was interested in exploring and learning about writing grants. And as anyone who's had any experience with that, it takes a little. You got to say the right things in the right way. Because we're all competing for a piece of the pie. And we were very fortunate this year to secure quite a few grants. So we would have had an additional capital ask for replacement of our body cameras. But Sergeant Exohopoulos, actually, we worked on 2 grants, one federal, one state, and secured over $113,000 for the replacement of our body cameras. And not only does that replace all the equipment, it actually pulled some of the direct costs out of our expense budget because some of the data storage and some of the things that we were paying for. That was one thing that in one of the select board meetings we were talking is that a lot of times we apply for a lot of grants and they're great, but they add new things. We were very fortunate with grants this year that it actually took some direct costs out of our budget. The other was a $53,000+ grant towards the accreditation process. We're working towards becoming an accredited police department, and we had some costs built into our budget that are being removed with that $53,000 grant as well. So that's what actually allowed me to reduce my expense budget this year. And we also have one much larger grant, $280,000+ that we received for mental health training for our officers, and actually for all officers in Middlesex County. We are now managing the Middlesex County TTAC, which is a technical training and assistance center for crisis intervention training for all police officers in Middlesex County, fully funded by DMH. But it was quite a significant program to be able to take over and run for all of Middlesex County.
So let me just offer, I think this is where Nora was going by asking you to bring these slides. Let me just offer big congratulations and suggest that you said lucky and fortunate, but I think there's some hard work and skill that lies behind
Yes.
that. And it is really appreciated. It is really a fine thing.
Yeah, Kelly did some incredible work, has worked very, very hard on it. And she deserves, I can't take any of the credit away from her.
Nora, did you want to follow up on any other dimension of the grant piece since you had brought that up before?
No, just my sentiments, Dan. So tell Kelly, thank you very much. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
I did have a question when you said about running the DMH. Is Sherborn the one who's now hosting it when you say running it? I'm just curious about that.
So, yep. So we are hosting the program. We have 2 employees that are paid for by the state that organize and run all of the trainings. So we've run them at the library, and then we also do run them countywide. And Sergeant Exarchopoulos actually comes with a background in mental health, and she is one of the instructors. So it actually, part of that grant offsets all of her overtime pay as related to teaching with the TTAC.
Okay, thank you for elaborating on that.
All right.
I have
Go
a
ahead.
question.
Go ahead, Natalie.
I'm writing the minutes and I just didn't hear all of it. So you're gonna have to say what you said. You got 280,000 for mental health training, and we're hosting
Yes.
the Middlesex County
Yep,
EMH.
crisis. Yep, yep. You can just to make it easy, CIT dash TTAC, CIT TTAC. So it's crisis.
Wait a minute, say it again. Somebody
Yep.
put it in the chat.
I will do that.
Thank you.
So, all right.
And can you please also, Chief Galvin, spell out Sergeant Kelly with a beautiful last name?
Yes. So when it comes to the budget now, we have all of our salaries, which is the biggest portion of our budget, and the other negotiated things are contractual obligations. The police union contract is entering its final year. So the raises and the increases we see are related to that collective bargaining agreement. And so you'll see some of those raises were less than the COLA that was given to the other town employees because it was pre-negotiated through our bargaining sessions several years ago. So when you look overall at our budget, it's about a 2.13% increase in the salary line. The only thing that's not fixed in that area right now is my salary. My contract expires in June, and I'm working with Jeremy and the select board on a successor agreement. So there's a placeholder in there based on the COLA raises for other town employees. Overall, with the salaries, you'll notice over this year compared to the past couple years or several years, a significant reduction in overtime. Unfortunately, as I sit here today, we are going to go over on our overtime line this year, but it's a direct offset to the salary line. We lost an employee due to a resignation. And then we lost an employee to the state police, which was very difficult to do. And then a third employee right at the beginning of the fiscal year, which was to Natick, and that's the one I have a real problem with. But can't change that. And but what we've been able to do is, so we're in the process, and we've been in the process of backfilling those positions, which can be very expensive. But what we've done is we've kind of worked with a program they have at Merrimack College. So we have one employee that we've already hired to backfill, 2 others that are in the final stages of the background check process, that they've already paid for their own police academy. They've already purchased their own equipment as part of their schooling and their master's degree program. So that's a significant savings as we add these new employees, coming at the end of this fiscal year. So do you want me to continue on the expenses, or do you want to any questions on the salary portion?
So I've just got a question for you on the salary stuff, just to sort of fill in. So it sounds like by the end of the fiscal year, you're anticipating being staffed up again.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And hence that being the reason why, even though there's the running over on the overtime line for fiscal 24, your expectation would be for fiscal 25, not going to happen. And so
Correct.
budgeting off of what was budgeted last year rather than the actual, which is likely to be quite a bit higher.
Yeah, but I won't be coming back at the end of the fiscal year for any reserve fund transfers or anything along those lines, because the surplus we'll have in the salary line will more than cover the overages and the overtime.
Do you have a okay? Do you have a guesstimate of what the overtime line is likely to be for fiscal 24? Understanding that there's going to be the offset.
So like we're at right now, about 102,000 expended of the 110. And looking as we continue, we're probably going to spend, I would say, just under 200,000 for this fiscal year, probably in the 180 to 190 range.
Okay. Thanks. Anybody else on salary stuff before we?
I just had a question. It's so when I'm looking at the regular salaries, so that that is taking into account the two replacements that are kind of, is that taking that into account, or is that going to be a bump, we think?
No, that includes everything.
It does. Okay. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
No.
I understood that line. Okay.
Yeah, there'll be no additions to that.
Okay.
You want to talk expenses, Tom?
Yeah. So on expenses, this is where we saw the offsets with our grant funding. As you kind of run through the lines, we were able to level fund several of them. When we get down into our admin info system line, it was just over a 13% reduction. That was directly related to the grant funding and some of the data storage that we're paying for our current body worn cameras. Kind of as you continue down, we had another increase in our animal control costs. Animal control also encompasses all the expenses related to West. So some of the food and some of the other services related to West increased a little bit. But I will tell you this, there has been a nonprofit formed, the Sherborn Police Working Dog Association, that is going to raise some money directly to offset costs as related to our Comfort Dog program, and also support mental health initiatives, that related to the community. So my hope is that even mid-year this year, I'm able to come back to the town with some donations from a private organization that are going to help fund West for the future and to offset these costs, so that hopefully we'll be able to see a reduction in this section of the budget in the future because of some private funding. And then in our other expense line, a significant reduction, and that's where we were paying for some of our accreditation services. So we, the direct relation to the grant funding had reduced that line. We do see an increase in our dues and memberships, and there's a couple of memberships that we're adding for the lieutenant, but also the real increase in that is we talked earlier about the Greater Boston Police Council, and so we pay our dues to the Greater Boston Police Council, and not only does that include a collective purchasing program, but we are part of the Boston Area Police Emergency Radio Network. So it provides a regional radio network over all of Eastern Massachusetts, and they have not done equipment infrastructure replacement in 20 plus years. So this year there is going to be a one-time fee, an assessment to every member agency. So there's about a $3,500 increase in our dues for this coming year to replace the radio infrastructure. And then just a slight increase in new hire equipment, and that's reflecting the increases in some of the bulletproof vests and other equipment that we have to purchase. My hope is that all that equipment will be purchased, the majority of it for our new hires, anything additional that they don't already have through this year's budget. And, hopefully we won't have to use any of it next year and hire anybody new. So with that, and that gave us just over a 4% reduction in our expenses for this year or for next year.
All right, thanks, Tom. Questions, comments for Chief Galvin? Nora, go ahead. You're muted.
Thank you. I was just looking at the cell phone and I guess it went up last year. So can you just elaborate on the doubling of the cell phone?
So the cell phones include, so we had some additional promotions last year, but we have department cell phones are issued to all of our supervisors, the lieutenant, myself. Plus, it also includes beyond cell phones, all of the data costs for all of our in-car computers. So we have connectivity for all of our vehicles to all of our state databases, to the town. So it's a total cost as related to all of those.
Thank you.
Oh, and I forgot, we did issue a phone to the school resource officer as well, which was new last year.
Okay.
Anybody else? Other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chief Galvin.
Thank you. And I will get you that information on the car as soon as possible.
That sounds great. Thanks. Okay, so Chief Ward, if you are ready, let's go. Happy to do whatever order you prefer. Operating, capital.
Let's hit the capital.
Okay. I'll share, if this would be helpful, I'll share the request forms and the backup, your memo.
That'd be great.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah. This is the latest I've ever started to, for the record. So we're in for a long night, you know.
So we flip things around and let Sean go first, and that good for Sean, not so good for you.
No, it's he's still on here, so it doesn't make a difference. I'd still be on for his too. So
Yeah, okay. Okay, so here it is, and I should say Zach did send around a version of this that instead of having the handwritten thing had it all corrected. So there is a formal corrected version of this. I just didn't want to bury people in emails, so didn't send that around, but there is a final version of this. So the floor is yours.
thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have a few different capital items we're requesting this year, and there's been conversation in the capital budget arena, whether it's going to be under one article or several because of the dollar amounts, but I'll break them all down for you. Then if you want, I'll take questions on all three. The largest portion of our capital request is for turnout gear. So we have 56 active members on the fire department as of now. About 43 of them are firefighters in some form or fashion, and each one of them are assigned a set of turnout gear. The turnout gear is fitted per individual, and everybody has their own set. What we've run into, if anybody happen to have the chance to read the memo, when we respond to fires, depending on where people are assigned and what they do at a particular incident, after a fire, their gear is virtually soiled, and it has to be cleaned before it can go back in service. So if you read the memo, we had an electric car fire in October of 2022, and there was about a dozen of us out of service for a week or so, and we run into this a lot. We just had a 2-alarm house fire 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we had a large number of people out for 4 to 6 days. So basically, those responders are completely out of service because they don't have gear to wear. So what we're looking to do, instead of outfitting everybody with 2 sets of gear, which is what most fire departments are doing these days, we're looking to purchase a number of backup sets with some basic sizes that can be shared by people as backup sets when they're out of service for a length of time. This has happened many times. We went to between mutual aid fires and the fires that we do in Sherborn, also training You know, the other issue that we run into occasionally is motor vehicle crashes. You know, bloodborne pathogen type stuff. The gear is totally out of service. For some incidents, we can clean the gear in-house, take some time. For others, we have to hire a company to come in and do it. They bring a truck and they bring all the gear out to the truck for basically a whole day. So basically, we're looking to start this initiative to keep our people in service when we have these incidents. If you go on to the next page, also kind of in the EV realm, we responded. We actually had, like I said, in October of 2022, an EV fire, and we found that we weren't very well equipped to handle it. Most fire departments are not. Most fire departments are kind of in the same boat that we're in. You know, they're starting to buy equipment for these types of incidents. The fire department's really worried about responding to one of these that's situated in a garage in a home. So based on that response and future responses that we expect to have, just a matter of time, we put in for 2 EV fire nozzles. They're specific firefighting nozzles that instead of basically having one of our members grab a regular structural nozzle and basically crawl underneath the vehicle, which is a terrible position to put them in. This is a extendable nozzle that can extend 20 feet out, and it gets under the vehicle. And then we also put in for the blankets, so we could maybe contain it to the car while it gets removed from a building or from you know, the outside of a building if it's up against a garage or something, or other vehicles. Because if we have one of these incidents, we own it until it's at a tow facility. And it could be, the one that we had was a 4.5-hour incident. Required mutual aid. We did a full fire department recall. I think I had 28 people there for 4.5 hours. So, and then the last item, as far as capital or water supply valves, I think as people well know, as was discussed earlier, there's no municipal water in Sherborn. So we have a system of dry hydrants throughout the town. There's about 20 of them. And when we have a building fire, particularly, we have to do what's called long supply lines. So we have a truck that carries 5,000 feet of hose, and depending on where the fire is situated, if it's up a long driveway, and we've had a lot of long driveway fires recently in the last few years, we need a series of valves to be able to deliver the water the right way and keep the water flowing continuously. Also, the other issue that we run into with that hose truck is if we were to lay out 4,000 to 5,000 feet of supply line, you have to boost the pressure on that like halfway or 2/3 of the way. And we don't have enough valves to really do that correctly. You know, we're lacking valves on a couple of the engines. You know, and it puts us in a predicament if one of the trucks is out on mutual aid or in the shop. We don't really have enough of these valves to go around for certain incidents that we've had. So, and that's why those 3 are all here, but I'll certainly take any questions on the capital.
Questions for Zach? Anybody have any concerns or anything about any of these items?
Comments, Bill. Go ahead, Hicks.
Exactly.
I think the chief's unmuted.
Oh, yeah, okay, I can fix that, just a second here. Oh, there we go, okay, already fixed it, okay, great. So just as a tiny bit of background, Zach referenced the things happening sort of in capital budget committee land. So having checked in with folks there, let me just briefly summarize what that issue is, and I can offer my sense of how I think it's gonna go. I'm not hearing any resistance to any of these proposed items, so I'm guessing, you know, I'm reading from that you know, advisory is going to support all of these items. I think the issue is just when they appear on the warrant at town meeting, how are they split up and divided? And the issue is that last year, right, the town passed a bylaw that amended the capital budget rules and said capital budget items are things that cost $25,000 or more and will last, I don't remember what it is, but are long lived and will last for cost $25,000 and are long lived. So some of the items here are under 25,000, and so one possibility would be that they get bundled up into something that adds up to 25,000, and they would count as capital items. I think, and as proposed, they would be financed with free cash. An alternative that may be the way it goes, which substantively doesn't really make any difference because they'd still all be financed with free cash, would be to split it up into a set of capital items, which would be items above 25K, and then have another category of special equipment purchases or some term like that that would collect the items that were less than 25K. And there would be some from other departments too, not just these. I think some of the IT items might be in that category. And so it might be a separate, rather than being listed as here's a capital item, might be listed in a separate warrant article at town meeting, still presumably to be proposed financed with free cash. So substantively, it's just a matter of what are the decisions made about how the warrant is organized and where do these items fit on the warrant. But I think all of them would be financed with free cash. I'm not hearing any resistance or concern about these. So I don't think there's any sense of advisory being unhappy with any of this. And I think the issue is just how do they appear? How do they appear on the warrant? And there'll be some conversations with Capital Budget Committee and Town Council and Select Board to figure that out. So a little extra complexity, but I don't think it's substantively going to affect the support for these or how they're financed. So just that would be my background. Zach, if you understand anything different than that, or Jeremy, please chime in. But I just wanted to kind of update everyone on the committee to some of what's been happening and some of the conversations on the Capital Budget Committee.
I think you nailed it. It's
So
changed a couple times, but I think that's where it's at right now. So
yeah, my sense is it's going in the direction of two separate warrant articles, but I don't think that's that's not done yet. But I think that's the direction it's going. And again, I think substantively, it's just not going to matter because I don't think it's going to affect the degree of support for these, and it's not going to affect the means of financing. So, any other questions on capital items? Jeremy, you just unmuted. Did you want to? Oh, okay. Then, Chief, do you want to go to operating budget?
yeah, we hit the
Dan-
fire budget first, if you don't mind.
Sure. Give me 1 second. I will get that shared and up on the screen.
So Dan, just a quick question on this.
Yeah.
Zach, there is a PPE line item, right, in the like protective clothing line item in the budget. I guess maybe related to what Dan just mentioned, is this something you need to buy all at the same time, or is this something that can be purchased over time, in which case it can go into that operating budget line item?
No, it's a great question. So we buy gear every year. We enter every fiscal year knowing who's going to get new sets of gear because the gear expires. Our gear is only good for 10 years. Every item that we have in our ensemble is only good for 10 years. So we need the capital article to start the program of the second sets. And if we were to wait several years to achieve that, it would sort of defeat the purpose. So we just kind of need this boost to get the second sets, the backup sets, like I said, for when the people are out of service from an incident. The other thing is the gear has to, any small tear, if it's less, even a couple millimeters, the gear gets inspected annually. Any small tear, it's got to go up for repair. That's the other reason why we need some backup sets, because that can take a month sometimes. So
I see. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll hit the salary side of the budget first. So On the second line, the FD officers, so we have basically a call fire department with 2 full-time employees, myself and a full-time lieutenant. To supervise that department, we have 2 on-call deputy chiefs and 7 on-call lieutenants. It's a span of, we have so many because of span of control. With the amount of people that we have, it allows the right number of people to have a supervisor and so forth at an incident and all that. The 18% increase in the officer line is basically a correction. So we have one of our officers who's been in a position for some time, has been paid a lower stipend, if you will, for some time, lower than what's the approved personnel board rate. And we're looking to correct that this year. And that's what that increase is for, the 18%. And then I'll just hit the other big one while we're at it. I'll take questions on the salaries. The call wages, which is line number 5 down, 5118. That's up more than the COLA. It's based on the current burn rate for that account. And if you look at the calls we're responding to and the training that we're doing, that's basically what we're spending now plus the COLA. So that account pays for all 56 of those fire department members to go to fire calls, to do training. It also covers our storm coverage. So if we have a snowstorm, we have an on-call fire department. So the snow will slow people down from responding to the station for an emergency. So depending on the snowstorm, we put people in the building for that period of time so we can affect an immediate response. So that account covers a lot. It covers a lot of people for a lot of different things. And that increase is based on that. That increase is 4,300. It's 4,289 for the COLA and 7,765 to make up for what we're actually spending based on the calls and the training that's going on and everything else. I think those are really the 2 changes for the salaries, unless anybody has any questions on anything else.
On the second one, Zach, you described it as really the FY25 request is essentially that's what it's costing to do things the way that we're doing it.
Yeah, we're over on that line right now, and we were last year too. So again, I didn't raise it for FY24 because you didn't know if it was an anomaly year based on the calls. Certain calls go out as a full department response, i.e. fires and motor vehicle crashes with entrapment or odors of smoke in a building, something like that. And some are not. Some are just a single engine or an engine in the ladder. So based on the runs that we've been having, that's what we're spending.
How much are you running over on fiscal 24?
So right now, give me 1 second. If I was in the office, I could have just pulled it up right away. Give me 1 second. I do have it.
Okay, if it's a hassle, it's not a crucial question. I'm just trying to get a sense of, as you said, that it's kind of just trying to get us to what.
I'm like 6,000 over right now.
Okay.
Right, not over budget, but over the percentage of where we should be.
Yeah, where you'd expect to be this time of year, given the fact.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, okay, and then you said you're up like 7,000 and change for fiscal 25 to cover the fact that, okay. So it's
We're
sort of
up a little more than I thought. That December 18th storm, that was like a $5,000 hit on that line or something like that. We've had a couple long duration serious calls in the month of January, where a lot of people responded to. So those have bumped it up even more than what my projection was. But things can even out. We'll just see how the year goes.
Okay. So what questions for Chief Ward on that?
Hey, Zach, I had one. Just the growth in the wages that's non-COLA, it sounds like we're not maybe seeing as many that growth in calls, but more people showing up to the calls. So, or are we seeing a big growth in number of calls year on year, actual incidents?
So last year we did 15% more than the year before as far as runs, fire calls. The December 18th storm had a lot to do with it, but that wasn't all of it. But what we have had, Mike, is more struck boxes. That's our lingo, our terminology. And that's basically a full department call out. So smoke in the building, structure fires, mutual aid, because we send a piece out and keep Sherborn covered, serious car accidents, and then the storm type stuff. So we have had some more of that, but we have, if you look at our averages compared to 4 years ago, we do have more responders going to calls. I think the average 4 years ago was 3.2 per call. Because some are one-person calls, some are four-person calls, some are 30-person calls. If you look at our averages now, it's something like 5.4. I don't have that number in front of me. That's just
That's
a
that's helpful. Okay,
basic
thanks.
number. So
But more of a nature of the calls versus staffing of the calls.
yeah, it's a little bit of both, but lately it's been more of the nature. If you look at this fiscal year compared to last. So
Okay, thanks, Zach.
What else? Other questions?
How is the dispatch working right now? Just your
wonderful.
take on
It's the
that.
it's the best thing we ever did as far as the fire operations. Just to give you an example, one person in the room, the police did a tremendous job with dispatch, but I live just over the line in Natick, and we had a fire 2 years ago with the Sherborn Police Dispatch. And again, one person in the room, there's only so much they can do so quickly. I responded to South Main at the Medfield line, and I called for mutual aid on the way. And that person, because the phone was still ringing, they weren't able to call for it. Well, we had a fire in Everett Street, which is right in my neck of the woods. A year ago, actually, I think a year ago today, maybe, or a year ago this past weekend. And I got out of the car on Everett Street, and there were 4 towns on the way already. And so the response for the mutual aid, we just had a significant fire 2 weeks ago. A pretty difficult incident, and they knocked it out of the park for us. And that's a big deal because that can really play into how the incident goes. So it's been really good for us.
So sounds like, big improvement.
Huge. Yeah.
It's great.
Yep.
Anybody else? Okay, you want to take us through expenses?
Yeah. So if you look at there's a couple big ones. There's some smaller ones that are due to inflation or other particular reasons. If you look at vehicle maintenance, it's up 2,000. Got to be honest with you. I actually a couple of these were a little higher originally, and the chair might know that. But based on some of the what we're hearing about the budget for the town, I dropped them. And the vehicle maintenance is a tough one because in our industry stuff breaks, and we have to fix it. And for the fire trucks, that means sending it out to an outside shop a lot. Our DPW does tremendous work, and they help us a lot, the DPW mechanic. But there's certain components on our apparatus that have to go out to a certified emergency vehicle technician. There's a huge, tremendous liability in the town if we don't for certain items. So that line covers that. If you look at other towns with the same fleet that we have that also use the DPW, it's a $40,000 to $45,000 line. So we're pretty diligent with what we send out and don't send out, and the DPW, like I said, really helps us a lot. But that's up, based on the actuals. Obviously in FY22, we had a pretty rough year. We had an incident, I believe it was FY22. We had a single incident that due to freezing on the apparatus, it was like a $20,000 incident. It was like the coldest day of the year. We had a 3-alarm fire on Town Line Road, but I believe that was FY22. But the other big increase is the last line, which is at FD NFPA certification 5857. So that account pays for a lot for the fire department. One of the items is new hire physicals, and the vendor that was providing our physicals folded. We went to a new vendor, and basically it was double the cost per physical, for new hires. And it's something that we're required to do. That's the gist of that increase there. There's a couple smaller ones based on inflation. One, radios and pages is up $400 because we got new radios through the dispatch transition. So we got a lot of equipment out of that through the transition grant. And the batteries that we have to buy for the radios that we got are more expensive than the batteries that we used to have to buy. So there's little stuff like that in there. But I'm happy to take any questions on the expenses.
Questions?
I had another question on cellular.
Yeah,
It looks like, actually, I was just looking at the 3-year average, so never mind. It looks like 44 to 5,000. I was looking at 3,000 to 5,000. So,
yeah.
okay.
That was up for the same reasons as police. We got computers in all the trucks through the dispatch, and it pays for the data. That's why it's up from 3,000 to 5, though. It's the data plans for the apparatus. So
Okay. Thank you.
What else? Everybody good? All right. You want to do ambulance stuff and walk us through that?
yep.
Okay. Give me a
So
second and I'll get those popped up. Revolving fund or the budget or which
I'd hit the full budget if you want.
tell me if this is the right one to
No, I think it's 231, Dan.
oh, the other one. Okay, got it. Give me 1 second. And here it is.
Great, thank you. So I'll take you through the salaries. So I think everybody on the call knows, we run an ambulance service for the town. We staff it 24/7 with the state mandated or 2 people on it. We typically have those 2 people at the fire station, which provides for an immediate response of the ambulance. It varies year to year based on where the calls come in. The station's on the north end of town, but if we have a large number of runs in South Sherborn, i.e. the Boggestown, Mason Hill Road area, it can throw our response numbers off. But typically our average response time is around 5 minutes and 30 seconds, having the people in the building. So that 383 number is EMT compensation. Covers all so covering all those shifts. So 2 people on the ambulance, 24/7, 365, and it covers all of their training in that account. So that's up above the COLA. The COLA increase on that is 12,670. And then there's 9,000 more on that we added. And there's 2 reasons for that. So about 2,500 is for training. So when people start working as an EMT for us, they have to ride 3rd on the ambulance for a number of shifts, and they have to go through an orientation program. And we have to expand that program for more hours than it currently has. And it basically, we need to provide for more shifts for the people to 3rd ride, and we have to pay them when they 3rd ride. We have to pay those wages out. The other portion of that is based on the coverage. So when I put this budget together every year, we try to calculate how many shifts are being covered at the station, and then there are some shifts where there's an on-call person. For instance, Tuesday nights and Friday nights. Tuesday nights from 9 o'clock on, Friday nights from 8 o'clock on. There's an on-call person at home, and there's one at the station. So the ambulance immediately responds with the one person at the station. The other person responds from home. People still have to live within a pretty reasonable distance to respond from home. And this line is calculated by how that shakes out every year. So how the shifts are being picked up, whether they're in the station or at home. And the increase is to basically cover how the ambulance is being covered right now, which is we just have those 2 partial on-call slots per week that are being filled as on-call. Again, that's something that's sort of happening now, unfortunately. When you put this together, it's at least 6 months before the beginning of the fiscal year, and then it's got to carry you through. And I think most departments would budget for 100% for 2 people at 24/7, but we've tried to stick with, what's actually happening. So that's the reason for that increase. And then the expenses, couple inflation items. Medical supplies post-COVID has definitely taken a hit. Some of the expenses on this is just more informational for the members, but if you look at like the paramedic expense, that's what we get billed. So if we go to a call that requires paramedics, which we have to get as an intercept from another town, we pay flat fees to all of them. That's what we pay the fee out of that account. And there's a billing service line. It's at 8,500. Just another informational thing. We pay our billing company 5% of whatever revenue we take in, and we're going to talk about the revenue in a second. But I don't know if there are any other questions on the expense side of the budget.
Anybody?
All right, then if you go down, Dan, to ambulance fees revenue, which is the 170 number. So that line, that's what we're going to talk about now. So there's a $35,000 increase to the operating budget from this line, and it's not that we're spending $35,000 more; it's that we've adjusted how we budget it. So the ambulance has, for the last 4 years or so, it started just before me. It had a revenue projection set in this at 205 every year, 205,000. We hit COVID right after that, which affected our transports, and the ambulance never made 205,000, but it was predicted to at some point. And there's a real issue with predicting more revenue for the ambulance. So we bill patients' insurance companies for transports with the ambulance. Okay, but it's a complicated number to arrive at because it depends on 3 basic things, which fluctuate every year. It depends on how many ambulance calls we do. From those ambulance calls, it depends on how many people we transport to the hospital. And then of the people we transport to the hospital, it depends on if they have insurance or what type of insurance they have. For instance, Medicare and Medicaid pay a federally mandated flat rate, and it's about 25% of what we collect on private insurance. So that's how the revenue gets generated for the ambulance year after year. So we're as the oh, sorry, my screen blanked out for a second, but it was me. I think it was my computer. I don't think it was anything you sorry. If we're basically just trying to fix a structural budget deficit of how this was budgeted for. So what would happen before is, there'd be a supplement at town meeting. So we're just really budgeting for it up front, closer to what the actual revenue number has been. So we're just fixing that.
Questions?
That's all I got.
Okay, questions?
I have one. This is a bigger picture question for, and maybe shows my ignorance in this process. But last week, I thought I understood what Deb said was that the snow and ice and legal items in the town can go over budget, and everything else has to be within budget. Did I understand? And where I'm going with that is the fire budget, EMT and fire, is somewhat variable, different than some of the other maybe town budgets. What happens if we, like Zach said, he's over on, or maybe trending over on the fire side? year to date. What happens if fire and EMT goes over budget for the town?
So I can answer that if you want, and Deb can correct me. I don't know, I can't see Deb.
Yeah, I'm here.
She's
Okay,
here.
sorry.
Deb, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, so if the fire budget as a whole, because that's an operating budget, it can't go over up until the last 2 months of the year. So, it has the salary, it has expenses and stuff like that. And then we can always do a reserve fund transfer. But the ambulance budget is actually in a revolving fund. So that can fluctuate from year to year or month to month based on the revenue that's coming in. So we don't have to watch that as closely as about going over budget. But like Zach said, historically, by when we get to town meeting, we know that we are, over budget at some point in time, and we're projecting to be over budget. And so we ask for a supplemental at the time of town meeting.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Deb.
Yeah.
Thanks, Deb. What else? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you, Chief.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So, all right, it's getting late. The last thing on our agenda was debt service. How are people feeling about that? Good to just keep going and talk that through and get it done, or are people exhausted and done? Keep going. Everybody's good? I don't think this will take too long. Okay. Pam, you just unmuted. Would you like me to share the document?
Sure.
Okay. Second. Okay, should be good. Take it
Yeah.
away.
All right, so this is my first time doing this one. So bear with me, and it's late. But most of them are pretty set out for like our bond for the principal and for the interest. We know what those payments are going to be every year. The things that we kind of have to guesstimate are if we're going to do a borrowing in 25, I'm sorry, and paying the interest off on our current band. So I did estimate on a $4 million bond, which I don't know that we're going to need that much. That's what that $86,000 is for interest. But like when Jeremy and I were talking, I'd rather have it be a little bit more than what we think that we're going to need, just to cover ourselves. The 86,000 in the 2024 interest. Yeah. That one.
Pam, I don't see a corresponding principal line. Would there be one or shouldn't there be one?
Well, we might have to have a pay down on actually the truck that Sean can't seem to get. He wants, but he can't get. There could be a possible $37,000 pay down on that if we were to borrow it again. I just don't know those answers yet, so it's kind of hard to put things in there.
Oh, okay. So just could you just say again what that 86,000 is covering?
86,000 is the interest portion on a guesstimate of a $4 million bond that we would issue.
Okay. Okay.
So that number could be a little bit lower because I don't think we're going to need 4 million, but it might also cover the $37,000 pay down that we're also possibly going to have to do.
Right. Okay. So, and this does not include any of the items in the capital improvement plan. So it doesn't include any of the capital requests. This is just everything that's in place now. Is that right?
No, the 4 million would include stuff for capital.
So, okay, so the 4 million would include the, you know what, I'm trying to think of, like, in the presentation Jeremy did, there was about 2.2 of like
No,
two,
that I'm sorry, that doesn't include that because that would
yeah,
be
that
for
that was what I was
2020. Yeah,
asking.
thank you. Yes.
This includes stuff that's already been approved. It doesn't include things that might be approved at town meeting coming up.
Correct.
Yeah, okay,
Correct.
sorry, I didn't ask it right, but that's what I was, it's getting late, everybody's getting tired, but that's
Exactly.
what I was trying to get.
That's
Yep.
correct, Dana. The debt service budget is more of a reactionary budget to what
Yeah.
is approved at town meeting
Yeah.
and through the ballot votes. For the, most of this debt is excluded debt and it's been voted on by the ballot. And this budget is sort of a reaction to that, with some small categories, as Pam mentioned, that that we try to plan for as far as sort of the short-term cost.
Yeah. And so
Most of this is kind of reactionary, and it kind of falls out the way it falls out based on when we actually borrow.
Yeah, of course, it makes perfect sense. But so if everything on all the capital requests were approved at town meeting, then presumably relative to the numbers here, ban interest would go up and ultimately long-term borrowing costs would go up. And I was just trying to get clear that that part's not included here. This is just sort of everything that, really from last town meeting was approved as what's reflected in these numbers. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. There's just been, I think there's going to be more conversation about that at the select board probably tomorrow. So just trying to make sure I was clear on the numbers. That's helpful. Thank you. Anybody else want to dig into, anybody want to talk the principal on the 2015 bond? If anybody wants to dig into some fun details. Nora, go ahead. I'm just kidding around. Go ahead, Nora. You are muted.
Sorry, do that. Can you just give like a 30,000 foot view of this, just for the record on, what are, so we have essentially $2 million interest payments. When are those gonna generally be coming up and paid off? And do you anticipate it just going up and up, or at what point do you see it coming down?
Until we start voting for things or having, to need to purchase stuff, it's really never going to go down. Some of the individual loans do drop off, or projects do drop off every year, but then they also seem to be replaced by new capital requests or the bans that we're going to roll over. So some are dropping off and others are adding on. That's what we talk about with that debt mountain that Jeremy put up there. That's what that is. Some are coming off and new ones are coming on.
And really what you're seeing here in this budget is that gray and teal of that chart previously. And, as this debt, the older ones fall off sooner. And as they fall off, that's why it tails off. The gray and the teal on that, mostly the gray tails off.
But that's assuming maybe it was that 4 million was put in there. Was that plugged in onto that teal or that chart? That's assuming that no other further debt gets taken on, correct?
Then 4 million?
Well,
4 million is already approved.
Well, I'm just saying, to have it, I was looking at like 40-45 or something, 20-45, something like that, of it coming down significantly, but it just doesn't. It looks like that's always going to be 2 million.
I actually think the drop off, that debt mountain chart has really good information looking out 3, 4, 5 years. Beyond that, the capital budget plan only goes out that far.
Exactly.
Capital budget plan doesn't include stuff that is going to come up that the town's going to probably decide to do. And anything beyond that isn't there. So of course it's going to tail off at the end because implicitly there's no more capital projects, no more budgeting 5-6 years out. And that's not how it's actually going to go.
Right. Okay, just,
And that's exactly, Nora, why I was so focused on exactly what's included in these numbers and what isn't, was to try to, get my head around just that point.
The only way to really reduce the debt that the town is carrying is to find another way to finance capital projects that doesn't involve borrowing. The projects are going to remain. It's just how the town chooses to finance them could change if there was another way to finance it without borrowing. So to find a way to self-finance more.
thank you.
What else? Paul, go ahead. You're muted.
Sorry, thanks. I'm just trying to understand. It sounds like for the budget here, which is the service on existing debt, right? Like both last year and this year is above the 3-year average. Is that just a function of we're just taking like whatever the muni bond market is, what essentially like sets this increase or flatness? Because it seems like we were flat, but kind of the what the muni bond market does is kind of like we're kind of market takers here, right? Whatever happens there impacts the amount the town has to pay on our existing debt. Is that the right way to think about it? Right. So there's not much we could do here. We just take what the municipal bond market is. And I don't know if we measure whether we're happy with our, our muni bonds compared to the market overall, because that's kind of the best you can do.
Yeah, this is all fixed interest. So when we do the borrowing for, the 2015 principal, that's fixed at the time of the borrowing.
I see.
We could refinance it and if the market was better or whatever. Right now it's not a refinancing kind of time.
Right.
But
right.
Our interest rates don't vary. We don't do a
see.
variable interest rate.
That's helpful, right?
So
Okay.
the variable cost per year is just the way the math adds up for what's due at that time.
You could think of it as like a succession of fixed rate, maybe 20-year fixed rate mortgages. And the thing that the town just takes from the market is whatever the current interest rate is on municipal debt. I think a chunk of the jump from the jump up, Pam or Deb or somebody can correct me, but I think a chunk of that is borrowing for the work on the library. I think that's a chunk of why the debt number jumped so much in like 22 and 23 and so on. I guess it's 23, the 23 and 24. I think a decent chunk of that's the library.
Right.
What else? Good. I mean, this is really helpful, Pam. This is really helpful context because, picking up on Nora's point, here's a 1.8 million the town's spending every year to cover the costs of both interest and principal. And, that's, I don't know, a little less than maybe 6% of the budget. It's not insignificant. So sort of everybody having in mind that that's where we're sort of starting. And then, new projects add to that as old projects roll off is just good background context for thinking about capital budgeting. That's my soapbox. All right. Any other questions for Pam? All right. Thanks, Pam.
Sure.
All right.
So sorry, Dan, you always kind of move too quickly for me. Just to, when, in what year do we see the high interest rates we're in a high interest rate environment, but with the bonds, do we actually see the high interests now, or do we see those last year or the year before? How does it work?
Well, like Jeremy said, our interest rates are fixed on all of our years of borrowing. So 2015, 18, 20, and 22, they're all fixed interest right now.
I meant on new debt.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's going to be more like we estimate like maybe 4.5%.
So meaning that number going forward is going to be potentially significantly higher. We're going to end up with kind of like, I forgive the use of non-technical words here, but with a glut of high interest rate loans for the debts that we acquired maybe this last year, this year, or will probably acquire next year, right? We're going to get a glut of those, and that's going to be at a higher interest rate, and so that is going to add to our debt service. Is that correct?
If the rates go higher, yes.
I mean, if Pam does a long-term borrowing in August, it's going to be at a higher rate than what these previous borrowings were at.
Right.
It's also just worth remembering that, Pam mentioned 4.5% interest rate, right? That's the muni bond interest rate. But remember that people who buy muni bonds don't have to pay federal income tax on the interest. So that 4.5% sounds like it's not that high. Comparing like to a mortgage rate, that's more like, 6.5% for bonds on which the holders do have to pay federal income tax on the interest. So that 4.5% it doesn't sound that high. It's actually a pretty high number.
Okay.
Did I say that?
We don't. Sorry, say that again, Dan.
No, I think we're good.
And again, we don't have any alternative other than acquiring, continuing to acquire debt, right? I always remember Peter Galatano used to say that, acquiring things for capital items, paying for things, capital items using debt is a way to ensure that items that have long lifetime are paid for by the people that are using it over time, right? But I can also, on the other hand, acquiring debt and continuing to pay interest, is a liability that's being passed from one generation to the other as well, right?
And the higher our interest rates, the more expensive it is to do that. 3 years ago, when interest rates were so low, borrowing was really, really cheap. Now it's pretty expensive.
Right.
Sean.
I'm pointing out an argument the select board has every year.
You're going to and explain. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
If you don't want to pay interest, don't make it exempt. Make the taxpayers pay for it and throw it against the levy. You'll get to the levy limit pretty quick, but that's how you don't push it out and pay interest over the long course. We've continually done that, and it was easy to do when the interest rates were low, but that's another consideration. Pay for it with free cash or just throw it against the levy limit.
Yeah, that comes back to what Jeremy was saying too about, if the police department needs a new cruiser or the fire department needs a new vehicle, and the town agrees with that it's important to do that, then either, has to be financed somehow. So either borrowing or some other, as Jeremy was mentioning, some other financing mechanism to cover the cost of it if the town judges that that's an essential, purchase to make.
Whether it's in the levy limit or out of the levy limit, it still hits the tax bill.
Right. It's it has to get paid for one way or another. A little question of how you spread the timing out, but you can't get away from paying for it.
Correct.
Anybody else? Hey, I just heard a thing on NPR today that bedtimes apparently are shifting earlier, including for people in their 20s who are now, at least the latest trend is to go to bed around 9 for people in their 20s. So I'm sure nobody here is part of that trend. I'm sure everybody here normally stays up till 10, 11, 12, whatever. But unless somebody has another burning thing, I'm going to suggest that we wrap up. And I'd be looking for a motion to
adjourn.
Thank you, Natalie.
I second. Yeah.
All right, let's do a quick roll call. Shelley.
Aye.
Natalie.
Aye.
Mike W.
Aye.
And
Why spoil the fun? No, wait a minute, aye.
Mike F,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Nora,
Aye.
Wasim,
Aye.
and I am I as well. So 9:00 for adjourning. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with. See everybody next week at the middle school for digging into school budgets. And then we'll have a week off. So thanks, everybody. See you. Bye-bye.